Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Ichigo was only man in Soul Society and married all part 3. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the StringDman for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. Let's start this video. Ichigo followed Shizuko back to Kyushin's hideout and was surprised to see that everyone was just lounging around. They all saw Ichigo walk with her and froze a bit. Was he here to help them, or did he have another goal in mind? Those thoughts went away as soon as they saw him smirk at them with a genuine look. So? He started while crossing his arms. Shizuko told me y'all need help saving a friend. I'm down with that, so what's her name? This new information caused Kiku to look to Shizuko in shock. Shizuko shrugged at her friend's look and motioned for her to answer Ichigo's question. With a sigh, Kiku answered him. Her name is Aqua Lauren. She's the one that helped me find everyone you see here and bring us all together. She's special to all of us, really. Ichigo saw everyone in there hang their heads down at this and had to ask. How exactly did a vast Lord Hollow, whatever that means, manage to take her anyway? It ambushed us. Jackie answered. Caught us all while we were out of town and coming back after a solid month of training. Jackie looked at Ichigo with hardened eyes. It was me, her, Kiku and Shizuko that were there fighting it off. We told the others to head out since they clearly weren't ready for something like that. It picked us all off before taking Aqua away. Kiku finished as she stood up and walked to Ichigo. We owe her a lot, Ichigo, and we'll need your help saving her. Okay. Ichigo answered nonchalantly, surprising the group. I'll help you out as long as I get to fight this vast Lord thing. It sounds like it would be interesting. This surprised them even more as they didn't think convincing him would be this easy. So how do we get to this Hueco Mundo place? Easy. Kiku started before heading to a door on the adjacent wall that Ichigo hadn't noticed till now. She opened it and turned the lights on to reveal some kind of circle with markings all around it. The others went, followed by a confused-looking Ichigo, and they stood around the circle. This took us many attempts to get it right, Kiku continued from across the confused male, but we finally managed to figure out how to combine our hollow energies together to open up a Garganta. The Garganta? Ichigo asked them while scratching the back of his head. Think of it as a portal to the hollow world that all hallows can open. Haruka answered with her hands on her in a mocking pose. Like that blue-haired chick you fought before. Upon hearing that, Zangetsu made her voice known to her orange-haired host. Seriously? You can do that too, no problem. Really? Ichigo asked her. Duh. I'm a hollow, that's also your dot, she answered in a slightly annoyed tone. Just focus a bit, conjure up some of my hollow energy, and just flick your wrist to do so. Not that hard, really. Ichigo chuckled a bit under his breath, much to Haruka's annoyance at thinking he was insulting her. Ichigo stood straight and took a breath before moving his hand forward and snapping his fingers. A Garganta opened up large enough for them all to go through. To say that they were all astounded and shocked would be an understatement, as they were all staring at him wide-eyed and confused. Ichigo grinned and looked at them all, their wide eyes and dropped jaws, causing him to laugh a bit at them. Well. He started. We going to save your friend or just stare at me all day? Before they could really say anything, Ichigo jumped through the Garganta. After the initial shock, Shizuko sighed out. He is just full of surprises. I like that. She jumped through the Garganta and was later followed by the rest of Kyushin. They all landed on the white deserts of Hueco Mundo and landed not far from a wandering Ichigo. They quickly followed him once they heard the screeches of many hollows and saw that the Garganta closed behind them. Ichigo. Kiku stared at him as she saw him just standing there, staring off into the distance. We have to find Aqua and dot. This place is not some kind of vacation spot for you to stare at. Found her? Ichigo said suddenly, catching their attention. What do you mean found her? Mo yelled out to him, waving her arms about. Yes, Mr. Kurosaki, please explain. Jen asked him. You said she was more hollow than Shizuko. He received a nod from her in response and continued. Well, all I had to do was look for the most human-like presence here and found her in that direction. He pointed towards a cave not too far away from them. Though, there are a lot more in that direction over there. He pointed to some kind of structure that seemed closer than what it actually was. Then we should head off to those caves. Kiku said as she stood in front of them all. Stay sharp. We're in their territory now, so expect to run some hollows on the way there. They all nodded and started to head off to the cave. Though they were completely unaware of a certain pink-haired woman watching them in her lab. Hueco Mundo, Saida Lab. Oh, Lady Aizen is gonna have a field day when she hears about this. 10 minutes later. Kyushin and Ichigo finally made it to the caves after having to speed things up. They all stood outside, ready for anything. Well, the ladies at least. Ichigo was just standing there with his hands in his pockets, seemingly bored for some reason. He didn't even wait for Kiku or Shizuko to give a signal as he just waltzed right into the cave. They panicked and quickly followed him. There were a few twists and turns as Kyushin could now feel the faint spirit energy of their friend not too far away now. Ichigo could feel it too, but to him it felt off. Wrong even. Something wasn't right here. They entered a large opening that was mainly composed of marble all around and saw a woman slouched onto a slab of marble. She looked very much malnourished and her breaths were very shallow. She had grown out spring green hair, pale skin, no clothes on to cover her well-endowed body, and 3 scars going across her stomach. The scars all converged onto her navel, and one of them looked fresh. The members of Kyushin all gasped at her state and wanted to run over to her aid, but that was when Ichigo stepped in. "Wait!" he yelled out, surprising them all as he went for his cleaver. "Something else is here." Then, seemingly out of nowhere, a tall hollow stood at the woman's side. To the members of Kyushin, they had seen this creature before and took a step back out of fear. To Ichigo, it looked like and felt like a true challenge had presented itself since he fought Grimjane. The hollow was tall and looked very similar to a horse. The legs at least. It had hairy brown legs with a long brown tail and a completely whited out upper body with a very muscular physique to it. Also, since it had no top, its S were out on full display to them. The mask was slightly cracked around its to show her along with that sadistic grin and the small horns on her head. Ichigo grinned as his right hand twitched a bit in anticipation of this fight. "Oh." The hollow started in its distorted voice. "Now isn't this something? A Soul Reaper. Or more precisely, this male Soul Reaper I've been hearing rumors about." She chuckled a bit as she continued to stare Ichigo down. "When I'm done mounting you, I'll take all of that energy and rule over Hueco Mundo. And why stop there? I'll rule the Soul Society, the world of the living, I'll even rule hell itself. No one will be able to stop me." Before she could say anything else, Ichigo had disappeared and reappeared next to Aqua. The hollow looked down in shock as Ichigo grinned before taking Aqua and leaving. He reappeared next to Kiku and Shizuko with Aqua in his arms bridal style. He handed her over to Kiku before unsheathing Zangetsu. "Take your friend and head out back," Ichigo said after snapping his fingers to open a garganta. This surprised the hollow and Kyushin. The hollow at the fact that he could open gargantas and Kyushin at the fact he was telling them to leave without him. Ichigo Iruka started before he interrupted her. "It's fine. I got this. Go on and get her out of here. I'll be right behind you in a few minutes," he said with that same grin when he fought both Kiku and Jackie. The girl shivered a bit but reluctantly left him to fight off this hollow. "Well then." The hollow started while raising its spirit energy. "I'm going to enjoy taking you as a trophy. Bring it on, my little pony." Ichigo insulted before watching her dash at him in anger. Back with Kyushin. The members of Kyushin quickly left the room with a circle and went to one of the restrooms. Kiku and Jackie set Aqua down on a bed as gently as they could and covered her up. Jen, having a medical background, went to work on her malnourished body. She put her IV bags to at least stabilize her. Who knows what Vastolor did to her. While Jen was tending to Aqua, the rest of Kyushin were outside the door wondering one thing. Was Ichigo okay? Back with Ichigo. Ichigo was more than a little disappointed at this fight. This hollow was strong, yes, but it lacked 2 things. Style and speed. Both of which Ichigo had in droves. He was practically dancing around her in a seemingly bored fashion. Dodging and deflecting her pretty weak attacks. Compared to Grimjane, this hollow was far below him in terms of power. Not wanting to draw this out any more than it already was, Ichigo decided to go on the offensive. He went for a slash and managed to cut her left arm off at the elbow. She screamed in pain and charged up a zero in her to fire at him. Ichigo simply flashed right in front of her when she was about to release it and grabbed her right when she fired it. The blast was contained and blew in the back of her head, killing her instantly. Ichigo dropped her lifeless body down and sighed. "Well, that was dumb," he said to himself as Zangetsu re-wrapped herself in the bandages and he placed her on his back. "Guess I'll just head back to them and see how Aqua is doing." Just as he was about to open a garganta, Jigoku made her voice known for the first time. "Ichigo," she said in a slow and raspy voice that caught Ichigo by complete surprise. "See Zangetsu?" Ichigo stuttered out. "That wasn't Ichigo," Zangetsu said in a shocked voice as well. "You can save that girl." Jigoku spoke out again. "But I already did," Ichigo answered in a confused tone. Jigoku started to laugh slowly at his words. This hollow was siphoning off her power. "She'll die without it, but you can save her, Ichigo. We can save her." Ichigo was a little skeptical at first, but relented when Zangetsu told to trust his spirits in his soul. "Okay, Jigoku. What do we do?" "Simple," she started. "Take my blade and force it to the hollow center." Ichigo did as instructed, taking the pure white blade out of its sheath for the first time ever. He went over to the now dead hollow and stabbed the hollow in its center. Now, let me do the rest. Ichigo nodded and let go of the handle to his blade. Suddenly, it started to glow as strange red markings appeared on the blade. The hollow glowed a faint blue color and began to pulse with some kind of energy. The energy from the hollow traveled the blade, draining the hollow and leaving it a lifeless husk. The blade now glowed that faint blue color and Jigoku was chuckling in Ichigo's mind. Go ahead Ichigo. She started in an almost mocking tone after she finished chuckling. Take me back to her. Ichigo sighed as he grabbed the handle again cautiously. He could feel a foreign energy coming from the sword and decided to get it back to a quad odd. He opened a garganta and went through, appearing in the same room as before. He went for the door only to find that it was locked from the other side. Hey! He yelled out in frustration as he banged the door. Open the freaking door. I'm back. Just as soon as he said that, the door opened a crack to show the weary eyes of both Mo and Yukiko. They saw the head of orange hair and flung the door open. Ichigo, you're alive. They both shouted at him in unison, causing him to chuckle a bit. This didn't go unnoticed as the other members of Skyushin came out of a room just as he exited and were surprised that he looked completely fine. He looked over to the rest of them and could tell that Aqua was in that particular room. Take me to her and do the same thing that you did to that hollow. Jigoku said to him, making him a little wary. With another sigh that caught everyone's attention, Ichigo walked over to the room, avoiding conversations in the process. He went next to the woman's bedside with his sword in hand and the rest of Skyushin on pins and needles at what he was going to do. Man, I hope this works. Ichigo whispers as he raises the blade much to their surprise before piercing her center. They all watched in horror as it looked as if Ichigo had just killed their friend, but that was when the blade started to pulse. The pulsing was subtle at first, but then began to get more and more intense as the seconds ticked on. The faint blue energy grew more and more intense as it began to change to a light green hue. The red markings on the blade began to subside as the energy began to move down the blade and to the amazement of everyone in the room and even Zangetsu, Aqua's body started to change. Her once frail and malnourished body started to gain back its muscles and health. Her breathing was getting stronger and she was starting to heal from the hollow's wounds. Her scars were fading away as if they were never there in the first place and she began to stir from sleep. Once the blade stopped pulsing, the energy receding back fully and the markings disappearing, Ichigo took Jigoku out of her and saw that there was no mark on her center whatsoever. What did you just do Ichigo? Kiku asked the seemingly confused male in the room. Ichigo looked at Jigoku before sheathing her and looking back to the rest of Skyushin. He shrugged. Saved her life I think. Never really did this before. That was when Aqua was stirring awake. She opened her teal eyes and immediately widened them before sitting up quickly. She looked around frantically around the room before seeing the girls standing next to her bed. They looked a little teary-eyed and before she could say anything, she was bombarded by numerous hugs from most of everyone. The only ones who didn't get in on that were Jen and Jackie, who were just happy to see their friend alright. Ichigo smirked at this happy little reunion and decided to take his leave by way of the window. Before he could really take a step out, Shizuko made her voice known to him. Thank you Ichigo. She said to him, causing him to turn around and be planted with it to his dot. The other girls blushed a bit except for Aqua who had no idea who the new person in the room was. As soon as Shizuko parted from him, Ichigo smiled at her then to the others before looking at a now shocked Aqua. Hope you feel better Aqua cause later on, you owe me one. When he said that, they all blushed madly at his words causing him to chuckle a bit. I meant to spar sometime in the not too distant future. They all were embarrassed and that was Ichigo's cue to leave. See you beautiful ladies later. If he would have stayed a little longer, he would have heard Aqua yelling out in a tone that was trying very hard not to sound. That was he. Things were not looking great for Surako's plans. Ever since Ichigo Kurosaki came to the Soul Society, hell ever since he was revealed to be a male of all things, her plans have had setback after setback. First he shows up at the Soul Society and captures her attention too much, then he winds up fighting and defeating a third seat, a lieutenant and a captain, all in the span of an hour or so, then he somehow achieves a Bankai in less than a day and stops the Sakyoku with ease. That boy is an enigma. She said to herself as she tried not to think of the way his chiseled body made her heart race. Or his powerful demeanor made her knees weak. Or how his words and charisma made her woman quiver. She shook her head to rid herself of those memories and was now stuck. She couldn't extract the Hijyoku from Rukia's body now, there was no way to truly escape now. That window that Gina and Kanem had was for them to depart, but thanks to Ichigo's sudden appearance and supreme power, topped off with many unknown variables about him, she was truly at a loss. This was a first for her. All of this planning, all of this setup with that Quincy woman to provide the perfect being, and I actually got it. Just not what I expected. She said to herself again while looking up to the ceiling in her barracks. Truth be told, if Ichigo had been born a girl like she anticipated, then her plans would have gone off without a single hitch. It was the fact that he was male that she had to change her plans. It was just a chance that when Rukia was sent to the world of the living, she confronted Ichigo. It was a single hope that maybe he was somewhat spiritually aware and would change into a female once he stole Rukia's powers. But alas, none of that happened apparently. Now, he was probably one of her greatest accidents ever, and the sad part is the fact that she doesn't make many accidents. At the thought of the teen with the killer body and supreme energy, Sarako started getting hot under her robes. She reached in to cup one of her S and the other hand to travel down to her near quivering woman. Just as she was about to remember the boy's body and probably release a lot of pent-up frustration, Gina appeared from the shadows of the secret lab. Oh ho ho. She started with a laugh, startling the brunette. Capnazin, don't tell me you're about to do something dirty without me now. Sarako turned quickly to her partner and took her hands out of her clothes. Her face was red with embarrassment, but her scowl told Gina never to sneak up on her again. Is there a particular reason you're here, Gina? Sarako tried very hard to sound like her usual authoritative tone, but the blushing along with how she was caught earlier was just too funny to Gina. Yeah. Actually there is. Saida reported something very interesting to me a little while ago. Something about that certain someone you seem to be overly joyed on thinking of apparently. Gina joked with that fox-like grin still on her face. Sarako perked up at this and looked at Gina with a scowl that wasn't threatening at all, since she was still blushing heavily. Gina chuckled a bit under her breath and it made Sarako more than a little upset. Sarako stood from her chair and decided to ignore her partner's childish antics. She opened a garganta and the two went through to enter Saida's lab, where they stumbled a bit at seeing the pink-haired Espada pleasuring herself in front of a screen with Ichigo on it. Sarako would have to borrow that image at a later date as it showed the boy battling some vasto lord in a cave somewhere. Gina was silently cracking up as she saw not only her usually level-headed leader about to herself, but now seeing one of the Espada doing just that to the orange-haired boy. She was completely naked as she used one hand to cup her impressive D cup and used her other hand to continuously pump a fairly large orange dildo in and out of her dripping snatch. My Saida. Gina started, startling the pink-haired Espada to the point where she fell out of her chair and the dildo flew out of her hand. I don't think you're that stud so much as to not even realize that we were here. Gina was an evil woman for doing that to the embarrassed and still horny Espada. Saida stood up while frantically searching for her clothes to cover her body. LLL lady, Aizen. I didn't know you were here. I apologize for not being observant to your presence. It's fine, Saida. Sarako said to her while holding a hand up to her. She wasn't really paying any attention to the embarrassed Espada anyway, as she had her eyes glued to the teen on the large screen. He not only was strong in person and demanded submission, but a simple photo of him had the same effect as well. Sarako had to bite her lip and tear her eyes away from the image in order not to see her already stained. She cleared her as she turned to Saida. So, what exactly do you have, Saida? Saida made herself presentable and thanked whatever gods cut her some slack on this day before answering her leader. Well, Lady Aizen, it seems that Ichigo Kurosaki aided in a rescue attempt for a very strange group of human women. These women have abilities similar to Hollows, yet are very much their own at the same time. The one they rescued was this woman. Saida showed an image of a malnourished woman with spring green hair laying on a slab of marble. That's not the only interesting thing, Lady Aizen. Saida started as she played the footage of Ichigo using his speed to grab the woman, and then, to both Sarako and even Gina's shock and amazement, he opened a garganta with the snap of his finger. The footage continued and showed him easily destroying the vast Lord Hollow with little to no effort whatsoever. It seems that he has power far greater than any of us Espada, especially after his battle with Grimjane not too long ago. And what did Grimjane say about his strength, Saida? Sarako asked her while still keeping her eyes locked on the footage of Ichigo, defeating Vasto Lord easily. She informed us that if he were really trying to fight her with the intent to kill, then she would have been dead right there. Saida answered her leader. Even if she were to use her release form, the boy still has his Bankai that's still too much of an unknown to us all. Gina whistled at that moment. Wow, this boy is just the epitome of interest, eh, Captain? But her question fell on deaf ears as she looked over and saw that Sarako was still staring at the images and footage of Ichigo Kurosaki. She wanted to know more about this boy ever since he attained his powers in the first place, but with everything that happened at the time kept getting in her way. What was she supposed to do? This male was like the ultimate puzzle, and she couldn't figure it out one bit. How is he like this? How is he so powerful that he could even possibly give the head captain a run for her money? Just what is he, and what is about him that just draws everyone from Soul Reaper to Hollow to him? Too many questions, and too little answers. Happen? Gina started again as she waved her hand in front of Sarako's face, snapping her out of her stupor. What did you say, Gina? Sarako asked her foxy partner. I was asking if you have some sort of plan or not, but you spaced out drooling over everyone's boy toy on the screen. Gina said to her usually stoic partner with a hint of concern in her usually cheery tone. I'm fine, Gina. Just thinking of something. Sorako required the silver-haired vixen. After a few silent seconds, Sorako looked to Seita quickly, catching the pink-haired espada off guard. I will need a sample of him in time. I don't care how you do it or what it takes, Seita. I'll need a sample of his blood or any of his bodily fluids. At that last order, Sorako caught wind of what she said, and both she and Seita blushed heavily at that. Gina couldn't hold it together and just laughed rather loudly at them both. Yes, teasing everyone would be oh so easy from now on. Back in Karakura town. Ichigo felt a shiver running down his spine as he was walking down the street to get home. He looked around and felt quite a bit of spiritual presence all around him. He smirked and recognized most of them. Let's see. It was the ever so familiar purple-haired flash goddess. Next to her being the one-armed fireworks expert. A little ways away from them, Ichigo could tell it was a certain midget that used to live in his closet back then. Next to her was a pretty familiar red-haired, tattooed woman he fought beforehand. Next to her were the bald-headed woman whom he also beat before along with her female friend that was with her before leaving. Finally, the last one he recognized all too well as that insanely powerful and very busty captain he fought with gusto back in the Soul Society. The other ones, a total of 4, he didn't really know all too well. One of them was a captain from before, the really petite one that was hanging around Yorichi way too much. The other 3 were lieutenants from what Ichigo could tell. All 11 women were watching him, and Ichigo smirked at the thought of spending a very good night in their company. Ichigo went up the stairs and soon reached the door of Kyushin. He knocked in a joking pattern, hearing commotion behind the door. After a few minutes, the door cracked open and the familiar voice of Yukiko asked in a rather harsh tone. Don't know who you are and quite frankly I don't care. She started through the opening. Get the hell out of here before there is trouble. Wow. Ichigo started while scratching the back of his head sheepishly. And I came all this way here just to see you lovely ladies. Oh well. Guess I'll just leave then. Before Ichigo could take a step, the door closed hard and he heard a lot of fidgeting with the locks on the door before it opened. He was greeted by both Yukiko and Kiku who were panting because of her rush to open the door. Ichigo stood there with his arms crossed and a smile on his face that was melting Yukiko's heart and making Kiku blush. Ichigo. Kiku started after regaining her composure to an extent. What are you doing here? She stammered out. Well, I just came to check on Aqua and see how she was doing since coming back. Ichigo answered her. Oh yeah. Kiku started before moving out of the way. Come in. We've been treating her ever since you brought her back. Ichigo went in and followed both girls. It came as no surprise when he saw the others, minus Shizuko, look straight at him with both joy and of course though this was mainly coming off of Jackie, Mo and Jen. Hey ladies. Ichigo waved to them and was greeted in kind. Hi Ichigo. They all said to him in different tones of want. So, how's Aqua? He asked them. She's doing better now all things considered. Jackie answered him. It was rough the first few days. Kiku stared at him as she led Ichigo to a door to the back. But, she's tough. She'll make a full recovery in a few more weeks. Kiku opened the door and Ichigo was greeted by a sight that was genuinely a surprise to him. Sitting up from the bed was none other than Aqua wearing nothing but a teal tank top that was doing very little to cover her large bust. Her hair was cut so now it was only to her shoulder, her skin wasn't as pale anymore, she had some muscle and fat to her now, and she was currently being hand-fed by none other than the last person Ichigo thought he'd see here. Chad. She was feeding Aqua soup while Shizuko was sitting in a chair near the opposite side of the bed. All 3 girls looked up to see a surprised Ichigo looking more precisely at Chad. Hey Chad. Ichigo spoke in a surprised tone. Hey, Ichigo. She stuttered out and gave a weak wave. To him. There was an awkward silence for a few minutes as everyone just stopped what they were doing for now. Aqua, not having the patience for this type of thing, spoke up first. Well, this is awkward isn't it? Sirite. Right now, Sorako was setting her plans in action. She would need to get to Hejioku and then get out along with her cohorts. Everything was perfectly timed and set so that there was little room for error. She knew where the Hejioku was located at, or more precisely, who. Unfortunately, with the Central 46 dead and an investigation going on right now, the window for her to leave was getting smaller and smaller by the day. It was now or never for her and her plans to replace the Soul King, and she was going for now. The stage was set, now it was time for her to play her part. It took some time to get people in place without her blowing her peaceful captain cover, but soon enough, she was able to get Rukia to come to her using her dot. She brought Rukia to a secluded part of the Soul Society, away from Sirite, and was met by both Gina and Kanem waiting for her. Both were ready to bolt once Sorako extracted the Hejioku from Rukia. Ready? Sarako asked her fellow traitorous captains. Ready, Lady Aizen. Kanam answered in her usual tone. Ready, Captain Aizen. Gina spoke in a teasing-like manner that got under Sarako's skin a little and caused her to blush a bit. Without waiting any longer, Sarako did the necessary to extract the object of her conquest. A large amount of spirit energy was released from this technique and it alerted everyone back in the Sirte. Sarako's right hand changed and she drove it right through Rukia's to retrieve the Hijoku, but the only problem was that it wasn't there. What? Sarako shouted out as she removed her hand from Rukia's and watched the girl fall to the ground like dead weight. No. This is impossible. Sarako was in denial right now. How could she have been wrong about the Hijoku being in Rukia? There's no way that Kisuke was able to get it out of her without gaining the attention of the Soul Reapers, so where was it? Lady Aizen. Kanam yelled out to get Sarako's attention. We need to leave, now. Sarako looked back and saw that multiple spirit energies were approaching them. Damn it. She muttered under her breath before a large garganta opened up from the sky right as everyone showed up. Aizen. The head captain yelled out as a beam of yellow light came down onto the three rogues. What have you done? Sarako, still angered by her failure, answered the aged woman. I am leaving to achieve my ambitions. Hear me, captains and lieutenants of the Soul Society, I will attain the power to destroy the Soul King and rule over all. The ground around the three broke apart and lifted them up on separate rock platforms. Of course there were protests against them by the ones closest like Sakiha Kamamura to Kanam, Izuko Kira to Gina and finally Momo to Sarako. The confusion of it all came from the fact that it looked as if Sarako was furious about something in both her tone and movements. Whatever she was trying to do with Rukia must have failed somehow. After the three rogues left through the Garganta, both Unohana and Byakuran ran over to Rukia's side. Unohana to heal her, Byakuran to make sure her sister was alright. Unohana. Byakuran spoke out in a concerned tone to the healer. She'll be fine, Byakuran. Unohana spoke in a calm tone towards the Kichiki clan head. Actually, as a matter of fact, she'll be more than alright by the looks of her spirit energy. What do you mean, Unohana? Joshiraku spoke up as she went to check on her subordinate as well as most of the lieutenants. I mean that by the feel of her spirit energy, it seems that she has a very high and potent amount of it. Unohana started again, surprising most of everyone there. Only thing is, it is not her spirit energy. After what had happened with Sarako defecting from the Soul Society and Unohana discovering that Rukia had very high and potent spirit energy that wasn't hers, there was a very hasty captain's meeting with lieutenants and a few seated officers in attendance as well, except Rukia who was back at the Squad 4 barracks. Everyone was on edge at what Aizen had said to them. How exactly was she supposed to destroy the Soul King? Scratch that, how was she supposed to get to the Soul King in general? So many questions were going through everyone's heads right now, but one thing was for damn sure, what exactly was Aizen doing to Rukia? And why did Rukia have such high spirit energy that wasn't hers? The captains and lieutenants all stood by as the head captain banged her cane on the ground to call the meeting to order. This is an urgent matter. The old woman spoke up. As you all know, Sarako Aizen, Gina Ichimaru and Kanam Tausen have all defected from the Soul Society. Of course there were mutters from a few of the lieutenants and a few comforting gazes to Momo, whom everyone knew cared for her former captain, so much more than just being her second in command. Captain Unohana, what have you been able to find out with Rukia Kichiki? All eyes were now on Unohana as she sighed and began to explain. From what we were able to gather from analyzing her spirit energy, she seems to have a foreign energy signature that has been present within her body for some time now. Byakuran raised her brow. What do you mean for some time now, Captain Unohana? She may be hiding it well, but everyone could tell that she was really worried about her sister. The Squad 4 captain sighed again. It seems that whatever this foreign energy is, it most likely appeared around the time when Rukia gave her powers to Ichigo Kurosaki. The name had the intended effects on everyone, especially the ones that have slept with him. Those few were blushing rather badly, and everyone else took notice. What exactly does Ichigo Kurosaki have to do with what's happening to Rukia? Kamamura spoke up, also curious as to why some of the ones present were blushing. Most likely it has something to do with Ichigo being in contact with her. Unohana continued then narrowed her eyes in a rather annoyed manner as she looked to the ones blushing. Though I'm sure if I did a medical scan of certain individuals that I'd find the same foreign energy. The 8 women present who were blushing, even the lieutenant behind Unohana, looked at this point. Is there something that I'm missing here? The head captain asked as she saw her captains, lieutenants and other seated officers looking away from her. The tension was very unpleasant and everyone was waiting for an answer. The 8 in question at the meeting, Rinka, Ikuko, Yumichika, Aisane, Renjiku, Nemu, Soifan, and surprisingly enough Kenpachi, all looked a little guilty of something, and most of the ones in the room really wanted an answer now. So is someone gonna explain, or should we just all stand here awkwardly in silence for a few more hours? Shizuka spoke up while tilting her hat to get a better look at the eight's faces. Aside from the fact that Aizen just defected and declared war on them, this day was hysterical to her. Hein, damn it. Kenpachi yelled out. We had with Ichigo. To say that there was a deafening silence was an understatement. No one made a sound as they all just blushed heavily, except for Anohana, who was furious at them for doing something so stupid, and the head captain, who was shaking her head at the rather blunt statement. As everyone simply thought about Ichigo again, quite a few of them were getting weak in the knees. Most had actually wanted to see just what made a male a necessity in the human world and wanted to find out through Ichigo. Now that the cats are out of the bag, and that bag most likely is flowing down a river, almost everyone in the captain's room that hasn't been Ichigo really wanted to know all the spicy details. Before any of them could even question the eight, the head captain sighed, getting everyone's attention. She rubbed her temple with her fingers and spoke in a rather irritated tone. So let me get this straight, Kenpachi, you and a few others decided to take it upon yourselves to go to the world of the living and sleep with Ichigo Kurosaki. At the same time, Kenpachi added, making everyone else more shocked at the male's stamina. At the same time, the head captain continued on. And now because of that, whatever Aizen was searching for within young Kichiki was thwarted. She looked at the others. Is that about right? It seems that way. Anohana started. Whatever Ichigo's bodily fluids, Anohana hesitated to say that as she tried and failed to suppress the blush she was trying to hide all this time. Did Terukia most likely has done something to the others as well. I'll have to run some medical tests on them to get a better understanding of how this has affected their bodies. I will also help you with that, Anohana. Kuritsuchi spoke up with a rather interesting tint of red to her usually pale face towards her created daughter. I'm quite interested in studying Kurosaki's spirit energy myself, really. Alright. Anohana spoke up, trying to sound professional despite her weak knees now. Since that was decided, the head captain spoke up. I want everyone who has been intimate with Ichigo Kurosaki to report to the Squad 4 barracks at once. Captains Anohana and Kuritsuchi will conduct their tests respectively and report back to give us their results. Until then, we will need to fill in 3 captain spots and prepare for whatever it is that Aizen has planned. This meeting is adjourned. With that, she banged her cane down and everyone started to file out. When they were gone, the head captain let out a sigh, then chuckled under her breath. It seems many of my soul reapers want a taste of that berry almost as much as I do. Karakura Town, Kyushin apartment. Achoo. Ichigo sneezed as he was talking to the girls. Are you okay, Ichigo? Kiku asked him as the others looked at him quizzically. He rubbed the back of his head sheepishly and smirked to them, causing most to blush. Yeah, I'm good. Think someone's just talking about me. Anohana was still doing physicals on the ones that it had with Ichigo. At least the ones present at the meeting at the time. She doubted that either Yuruchi or Kukaku wanted to take part in this, so she didn't even bother with them. Right now she was sighing as she leaned back in her chair for the umpteenth time today. She had just finished examining Ranjiku and was tired already. Mainly, from hearing every single one of them talk about how amazing Ichigo was in the sack. She had been trying to be professional the whole time, but they just kept on and on like a normal conversation. It was worse when Kenpachi started talking more in detail right in Anohana's face. The spiky-haired Squad 11 captain really wanted to be entertained by seeing Anohana squirm like this. The last one on the list was none other than her own lieutenant, Aizen. Anohana still couldn't believe that Aizen had actually been convinced by Ranjiku to not only go to the world of the living, but to also have a group with not only all of those present, but the only male soul in the entire spiritual world. The Squad 4 captain was very disappointed in her. Aizen started nervously as she stood in only a white robe like the others in front of the seated healer. Anohana had a very stern look on her face as she looked insane in the eyes, despite the tall girl's best efforts to avoid the gaze. Aizen. Anohana spoke sternly, causing Aizen to stand up straight out of fear of what her captain would say to her. I am very disappointed in you for being a part of what happened. I thought you had more self-control than Matsumoto, but evidently not. Aizen hung her head down in shame as her captain sighed. No matter. She continued, getting Aizen's attention once more. You know how these physicals go, so I won't tell you how to do any of it. Aizen nodded and removed her robe, letting it fall to the floor. Anohana had done a few physicals on Aizen before and had always marveled at that luscious and curvy body of hers. Though, for some reason, after Ichigo had his way with her, Anohana noticed that Aizen had gotten a bit curvier. Even before it was revealed that she had slept with Ichigo, Anohana noticed. Before she could continue to look at that delicious body of hers, Aizen coughed. Captain. Huh? Anohana spoke as she looked back at Lane's eyes. Aren't you going to start? Right. Anohana hesitantly began and examined Isane's body and spirit energy like with the others. Just like before, their bodies had been changed in a slight sense, while their spirit energy has Ichigo's foreign energy to it. Anohana had no clue how this would work, since Ichigo's spirit energy was basically foreign to begin with, but with the way that was of the girls that were intimate with him, it would have to fall to Mayuri to really figure out what was going on. With that, Anohana was at a loss. Okay. She started as she finished her examination. I've done all I can, now head to the Department of Research so Mayuri can take care of the rest. Why yes, ma'am. Isane stuttered out after she put her robe back on. She left the room to head out with the others to Squad 12, leaving Anohana alone to her thoughts and arousal. For as long as she could remember, she has always been the dominant type, even now, but for some odd reason, after Kenpachi's rather explicit remembrance of that night, Anohana felt something of her. I want to actually see and feel if Ichigo was as dominating in the sack as he was in battle. That want caused her to bit down hard on her lower lip as her love juices flowed in small spurts down her leg. Damn it. She muttered to herself as she quickly left the room to attend to some private matters in her personal room. Silencing Silop and screaming the name of a certain strawberry everyone wanted a piece of. An hour later. It took an hour, but Sarako finally compassed herself to look decent in front of her subordinates. Every espada was there along with Kanem, and they were all waiting to hear just what Sarako had planned. As the brown-haired leader sat in her chair, a little gingerly because of the Ingjina gave her just 10 minutes before this meeting and began, ignoring the confused looks on everyone else's faces. Now then. She started. As you all know by now, there was a plan to steal the Hejioku from the body of one Rukia Kichiki. Unfortunately, that was a bust. So. The number 10 espada, Yama, spoke up. Why should we care if that run doesn't have your precious little jewel? For someone so large, both in the bust department and muscles, she really wasn't much of a thinker. Because that little jewel is the key to our goal. Sarako spoke up once more. What exactly happened to it, Lady Aizen? The fourth espada, Koro, asked. From what I was able to find out, it seems that the intervention of one Ichigo Kurosaki is the cause of this. She answered. That was when an image of the orange-haired Soul Reaper appeared as a hologram over the center of the table. It was an image of him after receiving the combat P and showed off much of his face and muscular arms. The occupants in the room had their eyes glued to the image. Grimjane had a very feral grin on her face. She remembered their fight and really wanted to see him again so she can claim him as her own. Koro's eyes widened slightly at seeing the image in front of her since she had never seen a male before. Yama had a grin similar to Grimjane's, but she didn't claim him like said brunette. No, she wanted to own him 100%. The rest had somewhat similar thoughts. Some wanted him for pleasure, only one to experiment on, some for enjoyment, and some simply to deny others what they really want neutre. That's one hot piece of meat. Sterk spoke up, fully awake for once as she stared at the image of Ichigo with hunger in her eyes. Back off. Grimjane yelled out as she stood up. That berry is mine. I still want our rematch so I can claim him myself. Don't know why any of you think you can claim him. Saida spoke up while leaning her head onto her hands. She was staring intently at Ichigo, licking her in the process. I have a feeling that he would want a woman with a more feminine charm. The others in the room looked over to Saida with a mixture of irritation and intrigue. Sarako already knew that Saida had seen Ichigo when he rescued that Fullbring woman not too long ago. Be that as it may, Sarako interrupted before anyone else could speak up. Ichigo could very possibly have the Hejioku somewhere in his possession. I'll need him for everything to fall according to plan. Fine. Point me towards him and I'll bring my claim back in one piece. Grimjane stood up. Not gonna happen. Neutra stood up, much to Grimjane's annoyance. If the little kitten couldn't even give him a good fight, I highly doubt you could give him a decent one. You, bitch. Grimjane yelled from across the table. I coulda sworn you wanted Ichigo to you, not me. Neutra said with a grin. Before Grimjane could continue to rant, Sarako made her presence known with her spirit energy. If I may continue. The two sat down quietly while staring holes in each other. Now then, I'm fairly certain Ichigo must have it since he somehow took it out of Rukia Kichiki through intercourse. She didn't get too far after saying that. Ahoho. Gina started, causing Sarako to sigh in annoyance. So it seems that if any of you have him bang you on the floor, we might just get that fancy jewel cap and lost. For most, the thought of Ichigo on top of them and doing whatever he wanted with them was too good a chance to pee up. Anyway, Sarako started before any of them could even volunteer to go. I'm sending Koro to monitor him until we have sufficient data. His power is still relatively unknown, so we need to prepare as best as we can. I won't fail you, Lady Aizen. Koro bowed. See to it you don't. We need the Hejioku. Sarako spoke to her. Now then, dismissed, and don't even try to leave to get to the boy either. I'll know. The Espadas left the room along with Kanem, and all that was left was Gina and Sorako. You really think that little old Koro won't fall victim to that delicious body of his? Gina asked as she sat on the table in front of Sorako. I would hope so. Sorako started. Now would you please go away, I need to think. Oh well. Gina pouted. And here I thought we were gonna have some more fun. Oh well, maybe next time when you're all tense and tight. Then I can really enjoy myself when I ravage you. As Gina walked out of the room, Sorako could finally let her blush out and leaned back in the chair. The little vibrator egg in her left by Gina did not help with this meeting. Right now, Ichigo let out a sigh of relief as he leaned back in his chair. Today had been a long day for him just like the week has been as of late, but he wasn't really complaining too much. It had been almost a week since he last got laid by one of the girls, and to tell you the truth, he was fine with it for now. Iruchi was still around and would show up to him off, but could never stay for a night. Then there was Kisuke. Ichigo still wanted to punish her for almost getting him killed back when he was preparing to save Rukia, and boy would he make her pay for that. But for now he was finally finished with his homework and decided to get something to eat. Y'all thought he sighed because he came down with someone, didn't you? He stood up and headed downstairs to the kitchen, only to realize that his father was there as well. Issen was passed out on the couch in his doctor's coat, and Ichigo realized he must have been exhausted from today's batch of patients. As quietly as he could, Ichigo snuck into the kitchen. He grabbed a bowl of rice and was about to make his way up to his room when he felt a faint energy once again. He turned to the door quickly, but once he did, the energy left. Ichigo didn't recognize who it was and was wondering just how many other interested parties were coming out of the woodwork to get a glimpse of the first male soul. Those thoughts away for now, Ichigo made his way back to his room to eat some dinner and then catch some sleep. Outside the house. For about 3 days now, Koro had been watching the strawberry for that long now and hadn't really found anything too useful yet. She had been very careful as to not get detected by the boy or any of the soul reapers that would do patrols around the area from time to time. It had been a slow few days as she just watched him do the same things over and over again. Wake up. Use the bathroom. Get dressed. Eat a break with his family. Go to school. Visit those Fullbringers at some points. Go home. Eat dinner with his family. Do homework. Then go to sleep. It had been like clockwork to her by this point. There hadn't been any hollow sightings for these 3 days, so that was probably why things were so boring to her. Right now, Koro was sitting on an adjacent rooftop, watching Ichigo as he finished eating his bowl of rice and readying for bed. She sighed in frustration as she nearly screwed up again with hiding her spirit energy. It wasn't the fact that she was having trouble adjusting to the world of the living and its lack of constant. In all honesty, she was fine when it came to that. It was the fact that she had been so close to Ichigo Kurosaki. For some strange reason that she didn't understand, she always felt herself slip up whenever he looked in her direction. It was strange to her, but she decided not to pay any attention to it. Especially the burning sensation in her body whenever she stared at him shirtless. That body looked like Kami herself touched it to entice all women to him. She tried not to fall for it, but the burning sensation in her loins made it very difficult to. I should probably report back to Lady Aizen. She said to herself as she saw him getting ready to go to bed. As she was about to open a garganta though, she didn't see the smirk grow on Ichigo's face as he took his shirt off. Koro turned back around and her eyes glued themselves on that Adonis-like body. He laid down on his bed without covering himself with a blanket of any kind, and Koro felt that rush of heat through her body once more. She blushed hard when Ichigo put his hands behind his head so she could get a really good look at him. It was no coincidence that his window was never covered. Ichigo knew many women wanted to sneak peeks at him when he least expected it, so he just never bothered drawing the curtains at all. Koro swallowed the lump in her as she made her way to the window, seeing that he was asleep and decided to enter the room. She entered since the window was unlocked and landed softly on the floor. She stood there in the dark as Ichigo slept and watched him with both wonder and a hidden in her eyes. She had no idea why she was feeling this way, but something down of her, something she never thought possible, enticed her to take this risk and try to touch this body. She stood next to the bed as he breathed steadily and her face turned pink slightly. She looked at him closely and her breath hitched a bit. Koro reached a nervous hand towards Ichigo's pecs just to have a quick feel before she left, but as she was mere inches away, she failed to notice the smirk on Ichigo's face grow. At least until it was too late. So? He started, causing Koro to come out of her stupor and look at his brown eyes. You're the one that's been following me around, I see. Before she could retort or even try to back away, Ichigo grabbed at her wrist gently, much to her surprise, and guided her hand to his abs. Koro was beaten red at this point, a shade she never thought possible with her pale skin, as she felt how hard and muscular he was. Ichigo let her hand go as she started to rub her hands now on him. Ichigo continued to smirk as she was so it that Ichigo could practically smell the growing musk from her lower region. By the way, Ichigo started, but noticed that she was in her own little world at this point, not even listening to him. Ichigo rolled his eyes in amusement and decided to really get her attention. With his free left hand he reached around her and gave her a hard smack. The impact caused Koro to yelp as she felt an intense titillation and electricity from that strike to her romp. She panted hard as she leaned down a bit over Ichigo's and didn't even hear what he was trying to say to her. She was feeling pleasure for the first time in her life and that smack felt so good to her. Seeing as though she was still in a haze, Ichigo decided to take her out of it by smacking her harder this time. She yelped louder as she rose up just a bit for Ichigo to sit up and have her laying across his lap. Despite him being in his human body and her being in a rancor, for some reason Koro felt very weak right now. Like she couldn't force herself to leave this particular predicament. Now that I have your attention. Ichigo started as his left hand rubbed her clothed rear slowly and his right hand stroked her hair gently. I'm gonna ask you some questions and I want you to answer them or else. Koro swallowed another lump in her as she turned her head slightly towards him. Oh or WWH what? She asked hesitantly. Or else I'm gonna have to punish you. Ichigo answered with a grin. What else would it be? Koro was at a loss. She felt Ichigo's hard bulge hitting her stomach with every pulse through the fabric. She wanted so badly to see what all the fuss was about but knew that this was dangerous. That she had to leave and report back to Lady Aizen. She was getting ready to try and make a break for the window when she felt another hard smack to her rear. This time it was harder than the last ones and hurt her through her. Koro yelped loudly before covering her quickly and going wide-eyed. The reason why was because that yelp had a hint of pleasure behind it. What's going on? She thought to herself as she covered her. Why did I? Oh ho. Ichigo interrupted her thoughts and got her attention. She saw a devious smirk on his face and grew slightly fearful. So that's your kink, eh? You like getting ed? Before Koro could say anything, Ichigo gave her another hard smack. She yelped hands this time as she started to feel herself getting somehow from this. Is this really what pleasure feels like? She thought to herself. Why does the pain feel so good? So, are you gonna tell me your name or not? Ichigo continued, rubbing her hair gently. When he got no response, Ichigo shrugged as he used his right arm that was rubbing hair to grab her arm and place it behind her back. Koro was surprised by her lack of strength right now as she listened to his next words. Have it your way then. And with that, he delivered an even harder smack this time, causing her to yell in excitement. Ichigo smiled down at her as he gave her another hard smack, only this time she started to sing. My name is Koro Cypher. She shouted in a pleased tone as her tongue started to hang out of her. Ichigo smiled and decided to place a silencing seal on his room. Fortunately only Kan and Kuroto could hear it, but they were in Karen and Yuzu room and were very heavy sleepers. Next question then Koro. He spoke in her ear, causing her to shiver as his hand continued to rub her bottom. Why have you been following me for the past week or so? I haven't been following you that long. She spoke in short breaths. Ichigo slapped her again, getting another yell from her. I've only been following you 3 days. Ichigo arched an eyebrow at that. If Koro wasn't the one watching him when he visited Aqua and the other Fullbring, then who was it? Another time for another place, since right now Ichigo decided to have some fun with his uninvited guest. Well, more like an invited guest that was stalking him, but you get the idea. Deciding to up the ante, Ichigo started to undo her hakama much to her disapproval. She protested and was starting to get her second wind back, but that all came to a screeching halt when Ichigo decided to take the kid gloves off. He reared his left hand back, transformed it to his hollow form white skin, black fingernails, and slammed it down on her as hard as he could. Koro screamed as loudly as she ever had in her entire life, and the pain caused her to gush right then and there all over Ichigo's lap. Her hakama and were ruined and she was in a filled haze right now. Ichigo smiled again as this time he had no problems ripping off the pants. He looked at her and grew harder than before. She may have had a pale-skinned body, but her rear was red from all the shots Ichigo took. Top that off with how slick and it was from Koro's hard orgasm, and you had a recipe for one haluva night for a certain strawberry. Now then. Ichigo started after Koro came down from her head-induced, orgasmic high. I see you have the same outfit as Grimjang. Koro perked up a bit when she felt his hand rubbing and squeezing her red cheeks in various ways. She bit down on her lip to avoid embarrassing herself even further. Tell me what these outfits mean, what exactly are you and who sent you? I can't. She started in a near-hushed voice. Really? He began to rub her some more before pulling back again. Wait. She let out just in time. Ichigo lowered his hand and began to listen. Me and Grimjane are rankers. All part of the same army all serving under. She stopped herself as she didn't know if Ichigo knew who Aizen was or not. Ichigo detected her hesitation and gave a light, at least compared to the other times, smack that caused her to yelp this time. She still was tight-lipped, so he smacked her again, harder this time. She bit her lip to keep from revealing her leader's name. Despite being one of the most powerful espadas, she was beaten just with a few smacks to her like she was a child in trouble with her parents. After about 5 smacks and still no answer from her, Ichigo decided enough was enough. It had been hard since he laid her on his lap and started thinking about his girls, so it was time to claim an rancor. Ichigo let her go and started to snake his hand between her legs to her shopping woman, causing Koro to gasp in surprise at the sensation. Ichigo put one finger snatch and she let out another yelp. She bit her lip again to keep herself from falling for this kind of pleasure, but was finding it increasingly difficult with each motion of his finger. "You're one girl, you know that." Ichigo started with her. "But it's a good thing I'm a girl no matter what they find disgusting about themselves. Even you." Koro went wide-eyed and looked at him with shock in her eyes. That shock was quickly replaced by once Ichigo leaned down to her, moved her head to be facing him, and planted a searing to her full dot. The rush went straight through her body as she leaned and began enjoying it. While he was doing that, Ichigo was also removing her shihakusho and snaking off his pants. When he broke up with her, leaving her in a daze, he sat her up, went on his knees on his bed, and forced her down right in front of his huge dot. She went wide-eyed, and her face began to match the same redness as her dot. She had no idea what to do here, and looked up to Ichigo to see a stern look in his eyes. A look that promised more pain if she didn't do whatever it is he wanted her to do. Ichigo smirked when he saw the confusion on Koro's face. She had no idea what to do, so he decided to help her out. "Use your and start my Koro." Koro looked up at him with a flushed and embarrassed look on her face, but went back to staring at his tool. With another hard swallow, she opened her and gave the head a tentative lick. She tasted a salty flavor and retracted for a moment, but before she could fully do anything, Ichigo grabbed by the hair and forced his tool down, all the way. Koro went wide-eyed once more as her entire body was filled with his man and kept her from breathing properly. She wanted to run now. He hadn't even been in his Soul Reaper form or used any of his powers aside from one, and she was already pretty terrified of what he would do to her next. That fear, the need to get away was there, but with the taste of his member down her, Koro's thoughts became hazy once more. Ichigo started to move her head up and down his shaft, ing as he did, and got her in a steady rhythm. Koro was starting to get once more as he continued to slide his big down her dot. She surprised herself when she started bobbing her head herself, and Ichigo was impressed as well. Aside from Isane, none of his other girls could ever see him. Looks like he had a new girl he could do this with. The sensation and the warmness of her was unreal to him. He began to grit his teeth. Koro didn't know what was coming over her, but she began to finger herself as he rammed his dot. After about 5 more minutes of this, Ichigo's balls tensed up and he came down her straight stomach. Koro came just from the sweet taste of his semen and pulled back from him. She laid on her back on the bed with her dripping pail glistening with her own juices, panting frantically as she had just felt this man dominate her and release his essence down her like the slut she was. "Were you?" Ichigo started as he stroked his member. "Haven't been in a while. You're full of surprises, I see. Let's see just how tight you are." Koro could barely hear him, but she felt the tip of his dick entering her folds. She screamed as he shoved the entire length, breaking her hymen and now touching her cervix with the greatest of ease. Ichigo hissed out as she was truly tight. Definitely a virgin since he saw blood coming out of her filled snatch. She screamed out again as he began to move at a frantic motion. He made a slapping sound to her body as Ichigo was loving this. Koro's mind was in turmoil just like her body was now. She had tried to fight whatever it was she was feeling up to this point as best as she could. Her usual emotionless self was completely compromised the second that she laid eyes on Ichigo's body, and it was shattered the second his hand connected with her rear as he had her. She had no idea why she was so turned on from that simple gesture, and right now she didn't care. Her woman was being ravaged right now by Ichigo's large family, and she felt as if she was in heaven. Her body gave in to the pleasure a long time ago, now her mind was playing her, as well as Ichigo was in her, and it was too much. She began to yell out in pleasure as he continued to pump in and out of her. "Oh yes. It feels so good." She screamed out as Ichigo turned her around on her hands and knees. Ichigo had to admit that this was so far the tightest he's been so far. Koro must have never gotten any for her entire existence to be this tight. It was like a tight and warm vice wrapped around his as he grunted with every heart of her. "Phew, you're tight," he yelled out as he clenched down on her reddened cheeks hard. He grinned as he saw the look on Koro's face and brought his hand up. He brought it down and edged her right cheek hard. "Oh my god," she screamed out as she began to clench down onto his member even harder. Ichigo went wide-eyed and agape at how much she tightened up on him. With a grin on his face, he began to hear once again. Koro, at this point, was letting out a deafening scream as Ichigo relentlessly ed and ed his mattress. Her arms had given out and now she was just laying on the bed, face down, up and woman filled with dot. She had a silly look on her face as she could only feel pleasure at this point. Nothing else mattered to her anymore as she just wanted this to go on forever. Unfortunately, all things come to an end. Shit. Ichigo yelled out as he pistoned an ungodly tight hole like an animal. The tension in his balls was at an all-time high as he was getting close to his second release, and he knew exactly where to release it. Hope you're ready for this, Koro. Koro barely heard him as she had her third orgasm at that point. Ichigo grinned as he was close. He clenched his teeth and closed his eyes as he came off her like a geyser. Koro screamed loudly one last time as she came like a waterfall all over his dick as he came. The pleasure was too much for her and she fell face first to the bed, in a coma. Ichigo panted hard as he had never come that hard before. He pulled out of her, which was very difficult because of her tightness, and sat back on his bed. He looked at her naked and sweaty body and smiled genuinely to her. Ichigo went over and set her near him as he went over to his closet to get new sheets and a blanket. When he did, he went back to the bed and saw that she was sleeping peacefully. Ichigo smiled as he laid down next to her and she curled up his muscles. He looked down to see a content smile to her face as he quickly let sleep take him as well. Unbeknownst to the two of them though, Koro's body had a very faint orange glow around her stomach that, as quickly as it came, it disappeared from her. Ichigo slowly opened his eyes as the sun shined down onto him. The one downside of always having his curtain never drawn was that damn morning sun. Always waking him up at the crack of dawn. He opened his eyes at the annoyance of the light and was pleasantly surprised and filled with joy at the bundle of dark hair leaned up to him. He smiled as he parted the hair and saw the face of the Arankor that he claimed last night in a very rough way. Koro was sound asleep from their escapades last night, her and loins most likely still a little sore from Ichigo's rough treatment, but a content smile on her face. Ichigo drew the curtain so that the light wouldn't hit her face either and gently parted himself from her body. As much as he wanted to lay there with her, watching her beautiful sleeping form, he had a few things to do today. Most likely she would leave while he was gone, but that was okay in his opinion. He had an idea that Kisuke knew what was going on. Two of these Arankor are not that far apart from appearances and both attracted to him. One wanting to fight, the other to spy on him. Something was definitely going on that he needed to know about. Ichigo got out of bed and got dressed in jeans and a white shirt. He decided not to shower right away as he sometimes secretly liked the smell of muskin on him. It was nice and turned his girdles on to no end all of the time. Ichigo made it downstairs and realized he was the only one up. Not wanting his father to break his window or kick down his door to wake him up in a ridiculous way, Ichigo knocked on his door. "Hey dad, I'm going out for a bit," he yelled from the other side, not waiting for an answer. He left and went for the front door, completely unaware that the door cracked open and a pair of eyes watched him leave. Ichigo made his way towards Kisuke's shop, wondering just what this Arankor army had anything to do with him. Sure, he was already a very popular topic throughout the spiritual worlds, but something didn't make sense to him. If what the head captain spoke of was true, then why would an army be needed to grab him? This all sounded a lot more than just him, which was both good and bad. Good for him but bad for everyone else. He shook those thoughts from his mind as the shop came into view, and on the front porch was none other than Tessai herself as she was opening the shop. "Hey there Tessai." Ichigo spoke up as he walked up to her. Tessai was surprised to hear anyone else's voice aside from anyone who lived here. She turned around and saw Ichigo walking up to her. She blushed a bit as she tried very hard not to see what all the fussiruchi went on and on about Ichigo was all about. "Hello there Ichigo." She started in a hesitant tone. "What brings you here this early in the morning?" Ichigo smiled at her and she looked away with an even heavier blush. "Is Kisuke up yet? I need to talk to her about something important." Tessai nodded as she went, motioning for the strawberry to follow. They went past the storefront and the halls as they passed a few rooms. Ichigo looked in a few and saw one room with both those two kids that are always here sleeping soundly. One room had a stirring Yuruchi in her human form and naked as well, her glory on full display. She saw Ichigo with her tired eyes and immediately perked up. "Ichigo?" She started as he winked at her and kept walking behind Tessai. Yuruchi quickly got out of her bed and got dressed to follow the two. Tessai led Ichigo to Kisuke's room and knocked on the door. "Boss." She started. "But Tessai." The tired voice of the former captain could be heard from the other side. "Ichigo Kurosaki is here to speak with you." The three heard a loud bang and a few other things falling over before hearing quickening footsteps to the door. Said door flung open to show a disheveled Kisuke wearing a crop top and her looking directly at the orange-haired teen. "Ichigo." She started in a surprised tone. "What are you doing here?" Ichigo smirked at her before answering. "Well, I guess I wanted a good view of you." Ichigo answered as he looked Kisuke up and down. Those legs look delicious. Kisuke blushed hard before closing the door to put on some pants. When she opened the door, Ichigo got a bit serious. I was wondering if you know anything about a rancor, Kisuke. The word caught the three's attention quickly and they all shared a serious look among themselves. Kisuke motioned for him to follow her room. Tessai went back to the front to open up the shop while Yoruichi went with the two. Kisuke's room was very cluttered. Stacks of papers everywhere, some weird devices scattered around the floor, a futon mat in the corner of the room, and a small table with various vials and test tubes strewn around it. Ichigo wasn't all that surprised by the room in all honesty. The three sat down in some open area near the center of the room on cushions, and Kisuke asked the all-important question. How do you know the word Ichigo? Ichigo didn't back down from her serious gaze and answered in kind. Not that long ago, a rancor named Grimjane Jijurjakas attacked me and Khan on our way to a hollow presence. The two women weren't really surprised. They felt the spirit energy and went to investigate only for the fight to be long over by the time they arrived. I guess this visit isn't about that though? Kisuke asked him. Nope. Ichigo answered her before continuing. Just last night I caught a woman in a white Soul Reaper outfit spying on me from afar. This caught their attention. After some persuasion, she told me her name and that she and Grimjane are a rancor. The two noticed the emphasis on the persuasion and could only blush at what he did to her. She didn't tell me who their leader was, so I was wondering if you knew what was going on, Kisuke. Kisuke sighed as she answered him. Right now, the Soul Society is at war with Ichigo. War? He started with a raised brow. With whom? These a rancor. Worse. She answered. 3 captains have just gone rogue not too long ago and allied themselves with the Hollows. Who were they? No one that you know all too well. Kisuke answered. Their names are Sarako Aizen, Gina Ichimaru and Kanam Tausen. Kisuke sighed. They were the ones who killed the Central 46 and were the reason behind Rukia's dated execution of Ichigo. Ichigo went wide-eyed. He remembered the head captain telling him about the dead Central 46. Not to mention the fact they pushed Rukia's execution date. At least now he had a reason to be upset at them. If one of the rancor were sent to spy on you, no doubt that Sarako, the leader of all this, is particularly interested in you, Ichigo. Kisuke continued. Where is this rancor now? I left Koro back on my bed. Most likely she's already left by now. Ichigo answered her. Wouldn't be surprised really. Yoruichi answered as she leaned onto Ichigo's left shoulder. Well, if that's the case, Kisuke continued on. A rancor are hollows that have removed their mask and gained Soul Reaper powers. That's why they're stronger than standard hollows. Ichigo nodded now that he knew what he was dealing with. Well, if that's all, I guess I'll be more careful from now on. That would be Ichigo. Kisuke started. Aizen is a relentless woman who is as cunning as she is deceitful. If she has eyes on you, it can't be good. Ichigo nodded. He was about to get up to leave when Yoruichi spoke up to him. You know, my room isn't that far from Ichigo. Her seductive voice was all the confirmation Ichigo needed. Wanna have some fun while you're here? Kisuke's face flushed as she heard her best friend practically tell Ichigo to her in her room right now. She stood up quickly, grabbed Ichigo by his wrist, and dragged him out of her room. Yoruichi pouted as Kisuke just ruined her fun. The shopkeeper pulled Ichigo outside and looked at him with an annoyed look. He scratched the back of his head sheepishly and chuckled a bit. Kisuke left him there as she went back to the shop. Ichigo smiled and shook his head, thinking about how he still needed to repay Kisuke for training him and also punish her for lying to him about her being a former captain. Boy, that would be a very fun experience. While Ichigo thought of that, he decided to head home to see if Koro had already left or not. If not, then he wondered if she was up for round 2. Las Noches. Right now, Sarako had her espada and their Frachian all together in a meeting area. She had a confident smirk on her face as they were all waiting for Koro to return with information on Ichigo Kurosaki. Because of Grimjane's rash actions, they at least knew how well he adapts to battle situations and that he values the lives of his friends. Now it was time for them to know just what else he could do. As they all waited, some were getting restless. There was obviously Grimjane and her Frachian. They were very impatient and Grimjane just wanted to fight something, or it was senseless. For her, it really meant that she was in heat and her body was acting up on her. Another one becoming restless was the number 2 Espada, Baragalu Senbern. She was the oldest looking Espada among the group. Dark skin, a bit of wrinkles along her face and body, short white hair and a form-fitting white outfit on. She was currently sitting in her chair with her chin resting on her fist which was propped on the arm of the chair. She hated waiting for someone so insignificant in her one eye. Another that was getting rather irritated was a tall and skinny woman that was the 5th Espada, Noitrakilga. She may be skinny, but she had curvy that could make anybody turn their head towards her. She wore a tight uniform with a spoon top behind her head and she had black hair that reached to her upper back. The last was the biggest out of the group. She was large and muscular while also having a killer and a large rack. She was the 10th Zero Espada, Yamalargo. She wore the standard white pants, but the top she wore only covered her arms and a small bit of her dot. She never wore wrappings or anything under the top. The rest of the Espada and their Frachian were waiting patiently for Quoro. They didn't have to wait long as only 10 minutes later the 4th Espada came out of the Garganta. Sorako was expecting the same, emotionless and dedicated look to her loyal and well-polished rancor, but what she got surprised the hell out of her and the others all around the room. Quoro had a disheveled look to her. Hair unkempt, clothes ragged with her obi torn off so she had to hold her Hakuna up by hand, and her usually emotionless face was flushed red. "You Quoro?" Sorako started as she got the Espada's attention. "What the hell happened to you?" "Yeah, you look like shit." Noitra spoke up while grinning. Quoro blushed as she removed her eye. This was going to be really awkward. While Ichigo was battling Shina, another presence was felt elsewhere. Kuroto was running for her life in Ichigo's body as a large hall-like woman was chasing her. How did Kuroto get here on the rooftops of the city, running for her life? Well, it really started when she and Khan felt Ichigo's spirit energy spike for a brief moment. They went out to check to see if he was okay when suddenly the large hollow came out of nowhere and attacked them both. The hollow may have looked human-like, but it was clearly some kind of hollow the two had never seen before. It had half a mask that was in the form of a horse mask with a hole in its forehead that completely through her skull. She wore a large white shihakusho and a tattered hakuna that covered some of her impressive bust. Her skin is a pale color with her arms covered in horsehair. As quickly as she appeared, she immediately knocked Khan away and began to make chase for Kuroto, cursing Ichigo's name all the while doing so. Kuroto has been on the run for a few minutes now. As Kuroto was running away, she could hear the woman behind her spouting out nonsense that she didn't understand. "This is for blowing a hole through my head, Ichigo Kurosaki." She yelled out as she made to grab at Kuroto once more. Kuroto, using her speed as best as she could, was able to avoid the large hands of this monster of a woman. "What are you talking about?" She yelled back as she was beginning to run out of roof and her shape-shifting ability doesn't work in Ichigo's body. The large woman let out a primal scream filled with spirit energy and used it to reach Kuroto, much to the mod soul's shock. "I will make you suffer for what you did to me, Ichigo Kurosaki." She then punched Kuroto out of the sky and down onto the hard concrete of the street. Kuroto, in her pained state in Ichigo's body, skidded for a time before hitting a parked car. She grabbed at her right shoulder as it felt dislocated and looked up to see the large woman coming down towards her. With no time to react, Kuroto could only hope that Ichigo would find it in his heart to forgive her for letting his body die. The large fist that was on its way to destroy her was suddenly stopped when a woman with dark hair and a Soul Reaper's uniform with a tattered white haori on her left shoulder appeared in front of Kuroto. Her long, dark hair flowed in the wind as she stood in front of the shaken and surprised Mod Soul. Using just one hand, the mysterious woman stopped the large fist with minimal effort. Kuroto was stunned by what she just saw. This Soul Reaper must have been very powerful to do something like this with so little effort. "It seems I was just in the nick of time." The woman spoke up as she turned towards Kuroto, surprising the Mod Soul with her appearance. She had fair skin, a shapely face filled with experience but also some youth, and the most noteworthy of all was her eyes. They were brown, just like Ichigo's. Speaking of, she looked like she could be a gender-swapped version of the strawberry. "You okay, Kuroto?" she asked a still shocked girl in Ichigo's body. "Why yes." Kuroto stuttered out. Who are you?" The woman gave a big toothed smile and chuckled a bit at the question. "You should already know who Kuroto is. You see me every time you take control of Ichigo's body at the house." Kuroto had no idea what the woman was talking about and struggled to put those pieces together, only for the hollow woman to reel her fist back, causing the two to look back up at her. "And just who in the hell are you?" the large woman demanded, angered that she was stopped from reaping the rewards of her vengeance. The woman smirked as she folded her arms, the tattered haori and her hair flowing with the wind once more. "I am the former captain of Squad 10. She started with pure confidence. The former head of the proud Shiba clan and one of the few students of head captain Genmei Shijikuni Yamamoto. My name is Isen Shiba, currently Isen Kurosaki and the father of Ichigo, Yuzu and Karen Kurosaki." The answer shocked both Kuroto and the hollow woman as they both were wide-eyed. Kuroto had so many questions right now as to how this was possible. How exactly had the overbearing and hyperactive father, who was definitely a man at the house, really a Soul Reaper? And what did she mean by former captain of Squad 10? Why was her original name Shiba instead of what it is now? There were too many questions for the Mod Soul and no answers at the moment as the large woman began to chuckle. The chuckle began to roar mad cackling that rocked the neighbor completely. While Kuroto was afraid of this large woman, Isen was completely unfazed, causing Kuroto to wonder just how powerful she was. "Oh, this is absolutely rich. The woman shouted out the air, causing the windows of the building to crack. Since I can't get to Ichigo just yet, I'll deal with you first. Then, I will feast upon his heart for what he did to. Before she could even finish her sentence or even unsheath her large blade from back, she was cut down the middle in a perfect cut. Me? Those were the last words she could have said as she was split in half without so much as a warning. Kuroda was beyond amazed by what she just saw. All she did see was at one moment Isin was standing there calmly, the next she was standing there with her own and some blood on it. The large body split up and fell on the sides of the two. Kuroda quickly stood up, albeit in some pain from the strike and the fall she experienced earlier, and watched as Isin flicked her blade free of the blood. She sheathed it and turned towards the stunned Kuroda with a small smile. I would very much appreciate it if you didn't mention any of this to Ichigo, Kuroda. She asked in a kind voice as she walked over to the mod soul in her son's body. I'm not as good as other medics, but this'll help. Her right hand glowed a faint green as she placed it upon the dislocated shoulder. Kuroda flinched for a second before feeling the shoulder being put back in place as painlessly as possible. Good. Glad to see that still works. Isin spoke as she looked Kuroda in the eyes. I've already brought Khan back to the house. We should get there quickly before anyone shows up. Before Kuroda could even say anything, Isin grabbed her by the shoulder and used to get them out of there quickly. But Ichigo, 5 minutes ago. Ichigo and Sheena clashed a few times, testing each other's strengths for starters. Ichigo could tell that she was powerful without the mask, but with it on, she was on par with him on pure strength alone. What really surprised him the most was how skillful she was with her blade. Her attacks were precise, vicious and filled with purpose. He has seen fighting techniques like this before when he was in the Soul Society to rescue Rukia. Butchers seemed a bit older fashioned than Seirenka or Kenpachi's style. They clashed for a bit more until Ichigo noticed that her mask had started to crack. She jumped back as that happened and quickly dragged her hand over the mask once more to disperse it. Ichigo smirked a bit at this as he saw her sweating a bit and panting. So I take it that you can only hold that mask for a limited time, huh? He placed his blade on his shoulder and watched her scowl at him. Well, she stood up straight and looked at him with a now calm demeanor. It seems the rumors really are true about you, Ichigo. You are strong, stronger than I gave you credit for. I tend to do that a lot. Ichigo joked to her. Now, just what the hell do you want, Sheena? If it even is your real name. Oh, it is Ichigo, and I came to you with an offer. What offer would that be? Ichigo narrowed his eyes towards her. It could not be a coincidence that he would run not so long after running Grim Jane. They both had a similar kind of power, but it was different in many ways. What does this all mean? My offer, Ichigo, is that she was cut off when a large spirit energy flared for a brief moment before disappearing far off from their fight. What the hell? The two looked off in that direction, and Ichigo felt something familiar about where that energy was. It was odd that he would see as though it felt so off. Almost like Grimjane's energy, but on a weaker scale. As a matter of fact, it felt like a certain vast Lord Ichigo fought not too long ago back in Hueco Mundo. Fearing the worst for Kiku and the Fullbringers, especially Aqua, Ichigo leapt off the rooftop to make his way over to that lost energy. Hey. Sheena called out to him. We'll finish this later. Ichigo called out to her from over his shoulder. And next time, you better straight up tell me what you want, cause I'm pretty sick of having to fight women who want my help. And with that, Ichigo was moving far away from her line of sight in that direction. Sheena sighed as she sheathed her blade and looked back in that direction. I really hope he's the one that'll help defeat Aizen when the time comes. Quoro finally made it to the meeting room a few minutes later, still keeping up her usual attitude and stoic nature the entire time. Though, she was still feeling a little hot under the collar from before. The thoughts of that orange-haired stud still swam within her mind, and all she wanted was to be alone with her thoughts of him once more, but for now she had to subdue those thoughts during the meeting. Later should be fine as long as I don't have an alignment from Lady Aizen, she said to herself as she sat at her designated chair. As she was seated, Grimjane began to lean back in her chair in her usual relaxed way. She noticed Quoro sitting down and could swear she smelled something different about the most boring espada here. She smelled oddly musky like with a hint of sweat and, was that strawberries? Grimjane narrowed her eyes to the fourth as the pale woman had her eyes closed as usual and wondered just why she smelt like a certain fruit. Oh ho ho. Grimjane chuckled to herself as she figured it out. She still smells like that stud. Maybe this could be worth my time later on. She grinned a bit as she watched Quoro for a moment before Sarako showed up in the room. Sarako sat down in her chair at the head of the table, ignoring the gift Gina gave her to sit on in their last session. Suppressing a groan, she started the meeting nonetheless. Now then, it's time we began the next part of our plan. She spoke in her usual tone. And what exactly would that be? Yama, the large one, asked in a grumpy tone. Sarako smirked as she rested her arm on the chair and her chin in her hand. By now, Kisukirihara has most likely already figured out what my plans are to reach the Soul King's palace. And most likely she thinks that this boy can stop my progress. The thought of the teen had almost everyone in some form of excitement. Berserk, she was a bit indifferent about him, but wished to test her strength against his. Maybe even find out if he was worthy enough for her to go all out for the first time. Baraga, the second and oldest of the Espada, also wished to fight him and prove once again why she is the true queen of Wako Mundo. Maybe even use him as a plaything for a while. The thought made her smirk as she remembered seeing Koro's memories of that night. Hannibal was also indifferent as she had no interest in the orange-haired teen, though she couldn't deny that he was indeed powerful. He would definitely be a problem for Lady Aizen and had to be dealt with without any of these morons in the room wanting to jump his bone rather than finishing him off. Neutra was grinning madly as she wanted some of that strawberry. Maybe even see if he could pierce her skin in a sense of the word. Grimjane licked her at the thought of that stud once more. She needed to face him again and prove her power against him and then mate with him to her heart's content. She was still jealous that Koro got to get Ed by him long before she did, but that was gonna change real soon. Zamari, the seventh Espada, had similar thoughts to Hannibal. This boy should be dealt with swiftly and she was just the one to do it with her unparalleled speed. Saida was actually excited. She didn't really care of why he was or how good in bed he was, she just wanted to experiment on him and see what made him tick. The thought was entirely exciting to the pink-haired scientist. Aranette, the ninth Espada, was rather improved towards the teen. One hand, she found him interesting and wished to watch him extensively. On the other hand though, she figured that he would be a waste of time and should be fed to one of these other Espadas that wished to basically rape him. Yama also had a big grin on her face as she really wanted to get in bed more than anyone else in the room. Anyone who could tame someone like Koro without much resistance had to be an amazing lay. Not to mention the fact that from Grimjane's report, he was incredibly powerful. She wanted him so badly right now. Koro's eyes snapped open at the mere mention of the one who claimed her in his own bedroom. She tried and failed to stop her thoughts from going to that night as she could feel her already aroused woman quiver and become damp at the very name being repeated in her head. Sarako continued as she saw the many different reactions on her Espada's faces. It comes as no surprise to her that most would rather sleep with the boy than kill him and be rid of the problem, but it is to be expected really. At least the boy might be a welcome distraction if need be. Anyway, the Espada regained their composure as they continued to listen. So far, aside from some of the reports I've read about his battles within the Sirte and his battles with Grimjane and even a Vasto Lord's Hollow, not much is known on his real power. As far as we know, he is mostly an unknown factor in my plans and should be removed. This made a few of the Espada look to Sarako with conflicting thoughts. So we just kill him instead of having a good time like Koro did? Neutra asked, causing the aforementioned Espada to give her a hard death stare. Sarako smirked. In all honesty, it would be a waste if he were simply killed. This got more than a few raised eyebrows from the group at the table. He is very powerful and would even make an even more powerful ally in the battle, but from what we know, he is rather loyal to the Soul Reapers. Unless. She looked straight towards Koro, causing the Espada to visibly stiffen. We sent someone he knew to persuade him to our cause. With all due respect to Lady Aizen, Hannibal started, a bit irritated by the idea of keeping him alive. If he is such a problem, then shouldn't he be eliminated instead of coerced to us? The hell with that. Grimjane started as she stood up. I still wanna fight him then his brains out and him being here at my beck and call is just an added bonus. Like he would want some bimbo like you. Neutra sneered to the blue-haired beauty. What do you call a bitch? Grimjane was about to get in her face when Yama interrupted. I actually have to agree with Aizen here. At least then things would be a lot more entertaining here. She said with a grin on her face. DCH. Baraga folded her arms as she wasn't interested in the petty conversations of the others. Though the thought of capturing the kid was enticing to her. And this is another reason to bring him to the fold. Sarako started once more, releasing some spirit energy to get everyone's attention. He would be a welcome stress reliever for you whole lot and the rest of the Arankor within Las Noches. Don't you all agree? No one said a word as they could still feel Sarako's coming out, nearly crushing them all. When there were no words said, Sarako simply smirked and continued. Now then, Koro, she looked at the still flushed Espada. Why yes Lady Aizen. You and Yama will go to the world of the living in a few days and deal with the boy. Should he join us, bring him here to me. If not, her smirk grew devious, then make sure to leave a lasting impression, so here he considers. Both Koro and Yama blushed at the implication, though Yama quickly regained herself and became excited, while Koro started to feel a growing heat in her dot. In her stomach, she was feeling something that she had never felt before. What was it, this bubbling feeling she had towards him? Admiration. Anticipation. Joy. Well, that was a given, but there was something so much more than that she felt. After Sarako dismissed the meeting, Cora left rather quickly to her room and locked her door. She didn't know what she felt as it was an entirely new feeling to her, much like that night before. All she knew was that she really needed to rest before she felt anything else she was beginning to be afraid of. She started feeling hot all of a sudden though, very hot. Poirot took off all of her clothing, leaving her entirely exposed to the cool chill that eased her suddenly burning body, and laid down on her bed, hoping that whatever was going on would pee. She breathed a little heavily as she laid down on her back, feeling the heat rising in her once more. She began to sweat as her body refused to cool off, even in the relatively cold room she was in. All she could do was lay there, panting heavily and sweating profusely as her body was on fire at this point. She tossed and turned as a dark glow resonated from her stomach and started moving all around her body. The dark glow began to stretch to each of her limbs and center itself along her hollow hole, where the glow intensified and then solidified itself. Poirot was gritting her teeth and groaning as the heat in her body was becoming too much for her to handle. It became so fierce and intense that she actually came right then and there, causing the glow to contrast towards her hollow hole and disappear entirely. The heat had finally vanished, and Cora breathed a sigh of relief as she peed out from the feeling she had just gone through. As she slept through, unbeknown to her, her hollow hole began to break as a dark teal glow began to resonate from the cracks. Of it, a small pale hand began to reach its fingers through them. Ichigo walked along the street to get to school, still not sure of what Kan and Kuroda were talking about last night. It was a good thing he told Kan to head off before him and he'll just catch up later. It didn't make sense to him. What exactly does his father have to do with any of this? Top it all off, his fight with Sheena ended unceremoniously when he felt that spiritual pressure, but when he got there was nothing. This was starting to get on Ichigo's nerves and he had to find out what was going on sooner or later. "Hey Ichigo." The familiar and cheerful Orihime spoke up as she approached him. Ichigo turned and gave a small smile as he saw the girl. "Hey Orihime. How have you been?" She smiled at him. "I'm fine, just excited to get to know the new girl in our CL." She took a thinking pose. What was her name again? Ichigo narrowed his eyes for a second before answering as he knew what new student she was talking about. "You mean Sheena?" Orihime snapped her finger in a eureka moment. "Yep. That's her. I wonder if she would be okay with coming over to my place for a little get-together." Ichigo stiffened at that. Not really because of Orihime inviting Sheena to her place, mostly just because he knows a get-together at her place usually meant trying her off-the-wall cooking, and that was somewhat tortuous enough. It was the fact that Ichigo had nearly forgotten about her after last night. Closing his eyes, he reached out and sensed her faintly high air. Stopping in his tracks, causing Orihime to stop and turn back to him, he sighed before looking at the burnt orange-haired girl. "Orihime, could you do me a favor?" he asked her with a small smirk. She nodded. "Could you watch my body for me while I take care of something real quick?" She hesitated for a bit before answering. "Sure thing Ichigo, but what if somebody sees?" Ichigo chuckled a bit before leaving his body. He grabbed under the arms and quickly took himself to a back corner, Orihime right behind him all the way. Ichigo set himself down next to the wall. "Don't worry." He returned to his friend. "I trust you Orihime," he said to her as he edged her forehead, causing her face to go beet red and for her to nearly faint from that sign of affection and trust. Ichigo shook his head and chuckled right before leaving the area and leaving the burnt orange-haired girl in her daze. Without wasting much time, Ichigo appeared in front of Sheena as she stood there with that big smile on her face. She was in the standard school uniform, sans the red ribbon, and had her sheathed in her hand. "I think it's time we talked about Ichigo," she said, all the while keeping that big tooth grin of hers. "Oh?" he started as he folded his arms and smirked to her. "And just why exactly should I listen to you after you attacked me last night?" Sheena continued to grin at him in a slightly unsettling way. To Ichigo, this woman was clearly something else. She was a soul reaper, that much he could slightly tell from her, but she also felt like a hollow as well. That mask she showed him in their fight last night was no joke either. Despite her not fighting completely seriously at the time, her strikes were nothing to slack off on. Ichigo still remembered how his arm felt every heavy vibration from the force she produced each time they clashed. It was an intense fight, one that he knew he could last just by sheer power alone, but probably not experience. Sheena turned around and began to leave, surprising the teen. "Come on Ichigo." She started as she turned her head, a grin still on her face. "Unless you're afraid." Ichigo narrowed his eyes and proceeded to follow her. As they used to get to their destination, Ichigo had a very sinking feeling in his gut that this day was going to become very complicated. Blizzard hideout, minutes later. After a short amount of time, both Sheena and Ichigo landed in a docking yard. Ichigo looked around for a brief moment as he had never been to this part of Karakura town before. He was actually impressed at first, since something like this was never really a priority to him beforehand. Now, this was just another location he would need to remember just in case he ever needed to be here for any other reason. This way. Sheena broke him from his thoughts as she walked on, Ichigo following behind. They passed by several warehouses, all of various looks. Some were nearly destroyed, most rusted from one end, and only a few that looked decent enough to use. As they walked on, Ichigo could feel spirit energy of some sorts a little ways off from them. It was faint, almost impossible to detect, but there nonetheless. Sheena stopped in front of one of the more dilapidated warehouses and stood there for a moment. "Tanaka," Sheena started. "Drop the barrier and let me in. I have him." Ichigo narrowed his eyes for a moment before seeing a barrier of golden light appear visible to him. He smirked as he figured this was what he was sensing and watched as the doorway opened up for them. Taking a breath, Ichigo followed her just as the barrier and the garage door closed, ensuring that he could not escape now. Oh joy, a trap I guess. Ichigo started in mild annoyance as he looked back to the closed door before feeling 7 new signatures above him. Turning quickly, Ichigo spotted all of them watching his every move, ready for an attack at a moment's notice. The first person he noticed was a fairly large woman wearing a lime green suit of sorts. She was holding her arms out for a brief moment, as if she had just raised something up in the air and set it down. Her skin was slightly tanned, and her short pink hair had some sort of symbol at the top that Ichigo couldn't see. Below her was another girl in a school uniform, and she was leaning on a pillar with a book in one hand as she eyed Ichigo heavily, never lessening her gaze, and just waiting for some moment or another. Next to her on the other side of the pillar in a crouching position was a short girl in a red tracksuit with the jacket opened up. Her dirty blonde hair was in pigtails and seemed spiky slightly from what Ichigo could see. The next two were below them. One was a girl with bright green hair and a white outfit with orange accents and boots and gloves. She was leaning over a railing as she had a curious gaze on Ichigo. The woman next to her leaned onto the rail with her arms folded under her impressive bust. She wore a gray tank top, beige baggy pants and combat boots. She also had on black gloves with a knife in one hand. Her shirt's silver hair was held back by a band to keep it from getting in her eyes. The last two were on the second to last level. One with long curly blonde hair and wearing a black and white dress that went down to her calves. She held a knowing smile on her face as she eyed Ichigo with great curiosity. The last person was a woman in a light blue tracksuit and had her dark hair in an odd star shape. Ichigo couldn't get a good idea of her gaze because of the shades she was wearing, though he was wondering why she was wearing shades in a semi-dark room. "So this is the male we've been hearing about." The girl in the school uniform spoke up with a slight disgust in her voice. "I'm not impressed." Ichigo raised a brow as he watched her turn towards her book to continue reading it. Was she underestimating him? Well, time to change that. Without even a second ping after she said that, Ichigo grabbed her and snatched her book from her hands before appearing back in the same spot as before. The girl reacted accordingly when she looked down to see Ichigo looking through her book. He raised a brow before looking back to her and noticing that she turned away in slight embarrassment. "Yaoi? Really?" he asked as he closed the book. The girl leapt down and quickly snatched the book from his grasp. She turned away and made her way back to her position, ignoring the jeering she heard from the curly blonde and the star-shaped brunette. Well, that was slightly impressive. The one with the knife started as she leapt down to get a better look at Ichigo. "You seem tough. Care to prove that?" She quickly got a low stance as she held her knife in her right hand. Ichigo grabbed the handle to his blade and prepared for apparently another demonstration of his power to a mysterious group of women that most likely want his help for something. "Now, Kenko," Sheena started as she placed her hand on the knife wielding the woman's outstretched arm. "I didn't bring him here just for us to kill him. Relax." The now named Kenko sighed in annoyance as she relaxed her stance and walked away. Ichigo also relaxed as he let go and crossed his arms once more. "So why exactly have you brought me here anyway?" Sheena grinned at his question as she looked at him, causing him to narrow his eyes to her. "That's easy, Ichigo. We want you to join us." "Nope." He answered just as quickly as she raised a brow to how he gave his answer. "No?" "Yeah, no." "Well, you mind telling us why?" Sheena's grin left her as she narrowed her eyes to the teen. She then noticed that he was entirely too calm right now. "'Cause I don't know any of you right now, obviously." Ichigo started as he shrugged his shoulders and looked at each individual. "I can tell that all of you possess a hollow, but they're not as stable at all." He saw how everyone either narrowed or widened their eyes at his words, well, except for the one with shades. He had no idea what she was doing. He continued as he looked at Sheena. "I don't know what y'all want my help for, or why all of you are being pretty secretive about it, but I want no part of it. Now if you'll excuse me ladies, I should get back to school before I'm late. See ya." He turned away and began to walk towards the barrier, hoping that his words actually helped him in the long run. Last thing he really needed was another female group making his life even more complicated than it already was. First were the Soul Reapers, then the rancor that Quoro told him about not too long ago, the Fullbring that he really should visit at some point this week, and now these people. Things could literally not get any weirder for him at this point. At least that's what he hoped. Still needed to figure out what Khan and Kuroda were talking about. Wait. Sheena started in a partially serious tone, causing the teen to stop in his tracks. Ichigo turned to her and folded his arms in front of his. Yes. The sheer smugness in his tone rubbed a few of the girls the wrong way, but they held themselves for now. Sheena sighed and narrowed her eyes for a second. Kisuke hasn't told you about us, has she? Ichigo shook his head, causing Sheena to give an annoyed sigh. Figures she wouldn't. Well, might as well get introductions out of the way now. Sheena went over and stood in front of Ichigo. My name is Sheena Hirako, former captain of Squad 5. That caught Ichigo by surprise as he raised a brow to her. You were a Soul Reaper? Sheena nodded. We all were, until we had a little run-in with a certain woman and her that changed us into what is called a Vizard. Vizard? Ichigo asked with a raised brow. The Soul Reaper with hollow powers. Sheena explained as she motioned him to follow her. Ichigo shrugged as he decided he had nothing really to lose. They went over to a staircase as the others appeared around the teen. Ichigo couldn't really tell whether or not they would become hostile or not, so he remained vigilant just in case. And who exactly was the one who did this to all you then? He asked, genuinely curious now. That bitch Aizen, that's who. The short blonde in the red tracksuit yelled out. That was a name that Ichigo remembered hearing briefly before. It took him a second before he remembered that it was Quora that told him a bit about her boss. If this Aizen woman was the one responsible for Sheena and this group's condition and is the leader of the rancor like Quoro told him, then he would have to tread carefully if she had her sights on him. Calm down, Hiyori. The schoolgirl with the yaoi manga spoke in a bored tone. And at Lisa. The now named Hiyori yelled once more as she turned towards Lisa. That bitch ruined our lives and even worse, those Soul Reapers didn't do a damn thing about it. Ichigo perked when he heard that last statement. What are you talking about? Hiyori didn't bother to answer him as she quickened her pace down the stairs. It didn't take long for the group to reach a familiar underground cavern. Ichigo scoffed a bit as he shook his head in near disbelief. Somehow he had a feeling that this warehouse was important enough to have a powerful barrier around it. Now then. Sheena started as she drew her. The rest of the Vizards leapt back a safe distance from the two to watch what would happen next. Ichigo narrowed his eyes towards her. Why don't you show us all just what your hollow is like, Ichigo Kurosaki? Ichigo sighed once more and shook his head in irritation. He drew his blade and held it toward the blonde. Somehow I'm not so surprised that this would end in a fight of sorts. Ichigo had just left the Vizard warehouse after his fight with Sheena. It didn't take them too long as she had Hanaka make specialty barriers to allow the two to go all out in a sense. Ichigo wound up impressing them all when he showed them that he could actually manipulate parts of his body to be enhanced by his hollow. This surprised everyone, especially Hiyori when she tried and failed to sneak attack from behind, only for him to catch her blade with a pale white hand. It shocked everyone when he later revealed that his hollow and were one and the same, and they had a perfect synergy. Sheena attempted to get Ichigo to join them once more to help them stop Aizen once and for all, but Ichigo refused, stating that if this Aizen woman was a threat, then he would be on the side stopping her anyway. This seemed to at least ease everyone's tension slightly, and they allowed Ichigo to leave. For Ichigo, this whole Aizen situation was now starting to become a bit troublesome. First Quoro showed up and spied on him on Aizen's orders for a few days, then there's this whole Vizard situation now. It seems that whatever Aizen was planning originally didn't account for Ichigo messing everything up. Oh well, in his opinion. For now, Ichigo still had the mystery pertaining to his dad and what Khan and Kuroda were talking about. Whatever it was must be something important indeed for them to sound so distraught like that. Should he just ask them what they were talking about? No. That would just make the two very uncomfortable in that situation. Maybe if the ease dropped on them once more they'll slip up and say what was on their minds. No. That'll be too risky since he has no idea when they'll even bring up the whole situation again. What if he just cut his losses and asked his dad directly instead of just treading on eggshells now? A good idea, but his father could very well not reveal anything to him at all and act the same way he always does. Ichigo was stumped on how to proceed with all of this. Not only was everything in his Soul Reaper life starting to become a bit hectic, especially since he hasn't seen his girls in a while now, but now his personal life was being tested with his father's secret. Whatever it was, Ichigo would have to deal with it later on. As Ichigo was leaping through the rooftops after leaving the warehouse district, he felt something far off in the distance. It caused him to stop and look in the direction where he knew a park was as it felt oddly similar to when he saw Grimjane open that portal to leave before. Sighing at the thought of her once again coming here for a fight, Ichigo rushed off the direction he knew the energy was coming from. Though, what he felt was familiar and made him smile slightly. This caused him to increase his speed so he could say hello to an old friend. Park. The Garganta had opened, revealing the two Espada signs signed by Aizen to retrieve the strawberry. Yama was the first to step out as she had a large grin plastered on her face. So, she started as she looked around, fist on her dot, this is the world of the living, eh? As she looked around, she noticed several humans walking about and going on with their day like nothing was out of the ordinary. TCH. This seemed to irritate the larger anchor as she gave a sickening grin. Oh well, might as well enjoy a meal while I'm here. Just as she was about to inhale as many souls as there were, a new voice from the Garganta stopped her dead in her tracks. Enough, Yama. Koro walked out of the Garganta, a stern look in her eyes as she looked to her companion. We didn't come here to cause havoc like you wanted. We came here to coerce Ichigo to join us. The Garganta closed behind her, not enticing him with a brawl. Ha! Yama laughed as she turned towards the fourth Espada. Are you that because it was what we were ordered to do, or because you just want you berry boy for another good in? Koro sent a hard glare at Yama that really was not as effective as she wanted, since she was blushing heavily. It doesn't matter. She tried to recompose herself, and failed miserably. Lady Aizen doesn't want us to cause an unnecessary disturbance. Especially if it contributes to Ichigo not joining us. Yama started after she folded her arms under her large bust. So at least until he gets here, I'm curious about something. But the sigh, Koro answered after finally being able to control herself. What? Yama gave her a perverted grin. How good of a was it when he nailed you? Koro's blush returned in full force as she just looked away from the large woman. Yama couldn't help but laugh at Koro's reaction. After she had returned looking completely and totally disheveled, both Yama and Grimjane just couldn't get enough of teasing her for it. Koro would try to ignore them, but that proved difficult when they constantly kept reminding her of the best night of her life. It also didn't help that she had a little surprise waiting for Ichigo when he joins them in Las Noches. Their waiting wasn't long as Koro felt Ichigo's distinct energy racing towards them. She turned towards where it was coming from, excitement in her eyes at seeing him once more. Even Yama was taken aback by the sudden shift in Koro's attitude. To her, the pale fourth was always emotionless and even seemed dead to everything, then one night with their target and she's acting like a heart-struck schoolgirl. Yama didn't get it and apparently neither did anyone else. Ichigo was approaching and took notice of the two standing in a clearing filled with humans. One of them exercised his caution as he had never seen her before, but the other only brought him joy. He landed not too far away and began to walk over towards the two. Koro wasted no time as she ran towards him with teary eyes and a longing smile. She jumped over towards him, hands outstretched, and Ichigo caught her. Not even more than a few seconds after seeing each other, and the two were already heavily making out. Yama was pretty surprised by what she was seeing, but at the same time, she had to admit that this guy was a stud among studs. Even from where she was standing, Yama could practically feel all those muscles through his clothes herself, despite being nowhere near him. The way he twirled Koro lovingly was also unexpected, as he continued to do so for several long seconds before setting her down. The moment he released his from hers and the complete look in Koro's eyes was visible to the large woman, she could instantly tell that this Ichigo Kurosaki was the real deal. I missed you. Koro whispered to him as she hugged him. Ichigo held her close to himself and smiled at her. So did I, you know, I was a little disappointed when you left my room without even saying goodbye. Koro did something Yama thought she'd never hear in her entire life. Something nobody in all of Las Noches, hell Hueco Mundo, thought they would never hear from the stoic and emotionless Arancor. Koro was giggling. Yama's jaw was completely on the floor when she heard that. Just how good was this Ichigo guy? Speaking of which, Ichigo looked towards the newest spiritual being he's met now. He grinned at her, causing the large woman to blush slightly and look away for a second. So, who's your friend? Koro looked at her companion, as she had completely forgotten that she was there, and then decided to attempt to regain her composure to answer his question. This is Yami Largo, the 10th Espada. Ichigo nodded to her as he turned back to Yama. The two walked over towards the large woman as Ichigo still had his hand around Koro's shoulder. They stopped right in front of the still blushing Yama, and Ichigo smiled at her, causing the blush to intensify. It's nice to meet, Yama. Ichigo spoke in his usual lady killer tone that sent shivers up both women's spines. Pretty sure you already know me, but what the hell, I'll introduce myself anyway. I'm Ichigo Kurosaki. You might have heard of me. Yama nodded as she tried to look tough in front of the strawberry. Yeah, I heard of ya. Gotta say though, she looked him up and down with widening eyes, definitely better looking in person. Ichigo smirked at her. Flattering, I'm liking you already. He took notice of Yama's intensified blush and chuckled under his breath. So, what brings you lovely and beautiful ladies here? Did you come just to see little old me? Koro melted right on the spot when he called her beautiful, while Yama nearly fainted at his words herself. The two attempted to recompose themselves as he continued to chuckle at their reactions. As they tried to though, Ichigo could tell that they should probably take this conversation elsewhere, lest all three mess with the humans in this park. He picked up Koro bridal style, causing her to go starry-eyed, and looked at a jealous-looking Yama. "Follow me. Let's go somewhere a little more private, shall we?" He leapt in the air. Yama nodded furiously as she followed him through the sky, all the while still feeling an intense jealousy for Koro's position. "Oh yeah, I definitely want a taste of strawberry tonight." As Ichigo continued to leap through the air with Koro in his arms and Yama following very closely behind him, the entrance of the two Espada did not go unnoticed. Kisuke and Yoruichi felt the two entering the park and decided to meet them face to face in order to end the situation. Once they arrived though, they saw a rather interesting sight as Ichigo had also arrived and was twirling one of the Espada in his arms. The sight caused the two to grow jealous, especially Yoruichi who hasn't gotten any from Ichigo in weeks now. It seemed like Ichigo had everything under control as the two didn't even bother to attack him, obviously too attracted to him to fight. Kisuke was about to drag Yoruichi away from wanting to beat the pale woman off of her strawberry when suddenly the trio down below leapt in the air. Kisuke became curious as to just what was Ichigo's play here. He was indeed powerful and could easily take care of himself, but something just felt off to the dirty blonde. Something about that pale one in Ichigo's arms felt strange. It was the same feeling she got from Yoruichi, but much stronger and definitely more potent. It seemed stronger the more that Arankor was near Ichigo. Just what in the world is going on nowadays with that boy? Kisuke asked herself as she watched them leave. Whatever it is, I doubt even Aizen will figure it out. Kisuke sighed as she had to hold Yoruichi back from chasing the three down, no way was she going to let these two have a taste of her strawberry. As the group of three continued, Ichigo felt that both Kisuke and Yoruichi weren't following them and was a bit disappointed to say the least. He hasn't really seen them around all too much for a while now and was starting to get a bit worried. Did they just not want to spend any time with him or were they busy with something? Whatever the case may be, he was sure he would find out sooner or later. After a few more minutes, Ichigo landed on a gray plane about a mile away from town and set Koro down, much to her disappointment. Yama landed next to the two as Ichigo sat down next to a tree with Koro following not far behind. She sat next to his right side and snuggled him as he placed his arm around her protectively. Ichigo looked up towards the much taller and muscular Espada and slowly patted the spot next to his left. Yama, seeing no reason to object to any of this, sat next to him rather quickly. "So," he started, getting both of their attention, "just what exactly are you two doing here, besides to see me of course?" Ichigo looked at Koro, then Yama with a smirk on his face, as he knew the two were completely charmed by him. Yama was surprisingly the one to answer him, despite the apparent annoyance in her tone from having to discuss business now. "Well, Aizen wants us to bring you in and have you join us to fight the Soul Reapers." Ichigo raised a brow at what he was just told. Why would this Aizen woman want him to join her all-female group in order to fight against another female group and potentially just have her? Ichigo lowered his head as a large teardrop appeared behind. "Well, I guess I just answered my own question." Koro saw his lowered head and raised a brow herself. "Ichigo, are you alright?" "Yeah." He answered her while lifting his head back up and leaning back to rest on a tree. Somehow I'm not surprised why Aizen would want me to join her. Well, it's mainly so every one of us can for the most part," Yama said with a big tooth grin. Ichigo narrowed his eyes at her for a second before sighing. "Yeah, those figures." He looked back to Koro and saw her fidgeting under him a bit. "What's wrong with Koro?" he asked in a genuine tone, but felt as if he already knew the answer, judging from how she kept shifting her thighs around. "And nothing," she quickly answered only to feel Ichigo gently grab her by the chin and tilt her head so her eyes were locked onto his. She blushed heavily as Ichigo looked eyes. Ichigo smiled at her. "You can always tell me what's on your mind, Koro." He leaned forward and edged her gently, causing Yama to become a little jealous of herself. Koro leaned his embrace and felt whole. Ever since that night of pain she had with Ichigo, she had felt like she was missing something. When she left his side without even saying goodbye to him, she felt as if the emptiness of her had grown. When she was with him, that emptiness wasn't even a factor, but the second she left, that emptiness returned twofold. Yama gritted her teeth as she saw just how well Ichigo was working Koro so easily. She was starting to get pissed off at being left out of the action and decided not to just stand there anymore. Right as the two parted for much needed air, the tall Espada struck in a sense. She quickly grabbed Ichigo by his collar and pulled him bruising and sloppy. Ichigo was surprised at first, but expected this to happen as Yama was practically seething every second he gave Koro all of the attention. He leaned it and even slipped his hand coat to cop a feel on her muscular stomach. This caused her to slightly as Ichigo began to rub her surprisingly smooth skin. Yama gasped loudly as soon as he reached her, causing her to open and Ichigo to dominate her tongue with ease. Quoro for the most part was upset that Yama had just taken away her moment with Ichigo, but at the same time she was getting aroused by what she was seeing. Ichigo was working over the much larger woman with ease now, and she was starting to feel hot and bothered from the sight. She was getting just from watching their interaction and she wanted more right now. Ichigo felt his arm being pulled towards something warm, and Dottie turned his attention towards Quoro and saw she had his arm buried against her moist woman. He smirked as he knew exactly what these two wanted. And he was going to give it to them in spades. Las Noches, Choro's room. While Quoro was away along with Yama to bring Ichigo back with them, the sound of soft snores could be heard within the fourth Espada's room. Quoro was usually a woman of rather Spartan-like taste when it came to her room. Everything was usually a stark white from the small, one-person bed to the singular drawer that held only the bare necessities for someone to live with. Everything about her personality was shown in her room, which held just as much of a personality as she did. None. But that was before she met Ichigo Kurosaki, the only male soul in the spiritual world. Her room was now a bit of a mess with her now much larger, queen-sized mattress having many stains from sleepless nights ever present. The shelves on the drawer were strewn about all over the room, clothes laying everywhere, and the sheets for said bed bundled up at the foot of the bed itself. This is where the soft snores could be heard from. Lying there, sleeping peacefully as can be, was a baby girl of sorts. Her skin was slightly pale with a slight tanned color to her, black fingernails upon her hands that were gripping the sheets around her, and the most unique feature of all, dark orange hair atop her head. Hair that went just past her ears and smoothed out. The little girl continued to sleep, enjoying the quietness of the room and the calmness in her soul. Until a faint energy began to resonate around her. The energy was black with wisps of dark green and red around it. The energy continued to encase her slowly and steadily rose with each ping minute. The energy began to flare about within the room, causing a bit of a strong breeze to whirl the room. This continued on as the energy seeped from the baby girl for over an hour, until it finally died down and stopped suddenly. Once it did, the energy encasing the baby girl broke away to reveal a child no older than 5 or 6, laying there in the bed. Her skin had a bit more of a tan, while still having a pale shine. Her dark orange hair reached all the way to her, and when she opened her eyes, they were a chocolate color. The girl slowly sat up, grabbing the sheets to cover her nude and petite form, before looking around the room in confusion. She knows this place, but does not know where they were. She opened her mouth to speak, and could only say a few words. Mommy. Daddy. Mommy. The little girl started as she looked around the room with confused eyes. Papa. She continued to look around the room half expecting for someone to answer her, only for there to be silence. She stood up on her own 2 feet as she continued to look around the room. It was very Spartan-like as it was drab and plain aside from the large mess. The girl decided to walk around the room for a bit to get a good look around, only for her to stumble and fall flat on the ground. If it wasn't for the rather large blanket covering her, she would have landed badly on the hard floor. The little girl stood up on now shaky legs and began to walk around the room. There was really nothing too interesting or special in her eyes aside from the bed where Quoro slept, and that was when she noticed the door to the room was slightly open. Smiling to herself, the little girl walked over to the door only to realize that she was not wearing anything. Looking around rather briefly, the little girl decided to use the blanket as a makeshift dress for now. Her black fingernails extended a few inches and sharpened like knives as she cut a few holes in the fabric. The holes were big enough for her arms and head to stick out of. The last thing she grabbed to make this all complete was to rip out a part of a sheet on the bed to tie around her waist so that her makeshift dress was complete. Smiling at her success, the little girl left the room and began to walk down the long white corridors of Las Noches. There was really nothing of note with the place as everything looked the same as before. She hummed to herself as she continued to walk on searching for her parents in this place. After a few minutes of aimless walking, the little girl heard a few voices not too far off down the hallway. Picking up her pace, she saw 3 women and 2 of them were essentially just shouting at each other about something. One of these women had blue hair and 2 different colored eyes, while the other one that was shouting was tall with dark skin and long brown hair. The one that wasn't saying much of anything had olive green hair and kept half of her face covered for some reason. I'm telling you that Lady Hannibal has no interest in this male soul reaper cow, the blue-haired one yelled at the taller woman, clearly angered about something. And I'm telling you that you don't know a damn thing about Lady Hannibal's interest in shrimp. The taller one retorted. All I'm saying is that Lady Hannibal may want to find this man to pleasure herself for once since apparently you're so damn terrible at it. The blue-haired one gritted her teeth in anger. How you think I can't please her any better than this man could like you could do any better? I most certainly could. And I most certainly have done better than you. The two butted heads as they were about to begin shouting at one another once more until the third one spoke up for the first time. I say we just bring this man here and find out for ourselves if he can provide Lady Hallible the pleasure you two seem to fail so miserably at doing. Shut up Sung Sung. They both yelled out to her as Sung Sung turned and left with a chuckle under her breath. The two stared each other down once more before leaving the area. Appa. The girl spoke up as she gained a look of determination to find who she knew they were talking about. That probably meant that he wasn't here in this place if those two were talking about bringing him here for someone else. The girl walked on, hoping that she could figure out just where her papa was at the moment. It actually didn't take her long to stumble upon a sight that was probably a little too much for her young eyes. She stumbled upon a slightly open door down the hallway and heard noises coming from it. You like that, don't ya? The voice came from the room as the little girl peered and immediately was stunned by what she saw. There was a very tall and skinny woman with long black hair and an eye patch holding another woman with dirty blonde hair up against a wall by the back of her neck. The woman with blonde hair was completely nude and her face was nearly beet red from being choked, but the look on her face was one of intense pleasure as the tall woman was shoving one of her long arms. The woman on the wall was completely naked from the waist down and seemed to be enjoying herself while the taller one continued moving her arm in and out of her. Admit that you like Tesla, you and slut. The taller one began as the now named Tesla could only wheeze out in short breaths while her tongue was hanging out her. That's a good slut. You better gush for me. And gush for me, Tesla. Do not keep me waiting, Tesla. The taller one screamed out and seemed to squeeze Tesla's harder, causing her to roll her eyes to the back of her head. The tall one's arm became a blur as she moved in and out of Tesla and until the dirty blonde sprayed her juices out in a torrent on the tall one's arm. The dominant woman grinned as she quickly removed her arm, lifted Tesla high against the wall so her gushing woman was directly in her face and opened her wide to catch as much of the woman's juice as possible. It took a few minutes, but eventually Tesla stopped and spasmed hard as the tall woman loosened her grip on her neck and swallowed as much of her juice that was in her. When she finished, she grinned as she dropped Tesla hard onto the ground. Tesla took in long and gasped of air as a large bruise in the shape of a hand was formed on her neck. Good girl, Tesla. The tall one started as Tesla was still regaining her breath. She began to undo her own pants and let them fall to the ground to reveal she wasn't wearing anything underneath. Her own woman dripping in anticipation. Now get over her and show me how much of a slut you really are. Tesla, hearing what was told to her, crawled over to the woman, tongue still handing out, and began to get to work eating her out. Thank you, Mistress Neutra. Tesla spoke in between licks. The little girl slowly walked away from the door and quickly left the scene as it was a bit too much for her to process. There were so many questions going on at the moment. Like why someone would enjoy being choked like that or why that Neutra woman was so incredibly tall. Those little thoughts popped ahead until she heard more voices down another hallway. She was so in thought that she failed to realize that there was an adjacent hallway now. She turned down this new hallway and walked down to where she knew the voices were and could hear us of some kind. She walked on until she rounded a corner and saw a woman with blue hair sitting next to the wall with her clothes scattered everywhere and fingering herself hard. God damn it. She mumbled to herself. I want that berry so badly. She breathed out heavily as she used her free left hand to fondle her as she pumped her fingers moist hole. She squirmed as she continued pleasuring herself and continued talking to herself as well. Damn you Quoro for showing us all that shit you two did. It should have been me. Oh, she arched up her back and went. Oh shit. She gritted her teeth and came hard right in the hallway, spraying all the way to another wall in total euphoria. When she finished, she fell to the ground and panted heavily. She panted out. Wish I was in the world of the living now again to jump Barry Boy's big dick instead of those two bitches. The little girl heard her say that and now knew exactly where to go. She turned away from the blue-haired woman and left just as a tall and muscular woman with red hair parted to the side came over. Grim Jane. What are you doing? Grim Jane simply looked up to her blushing Frachian and grew a tick mark. Thinking of getting plowed by Ichigo. Why the hell else would I be sprawled out like this in the middle of the hallway? Ichigo was steadily putting his Hakuna back on as he felt sore from the waist down. While he absolutely enjoyed his time with both Yama and Quoro, he realized way too late that one of these two was much heavier than the other. It didn't help that she loved riding him for all he was worth at the time and didn't really allow him to take control too often. Yama was indeed a stamina freak, lasting longer than Quoro did at the time. Ichigo lost track of time with these two as they each seemed to try and outdo each other in a sense. Yes, Yama won in the end by one last shot as compared to Quoro before pinging out onto the grey plane. Right now, though, it was well the night time and Ichigo stretched himself out, trying to get his legs back. Arankor women were a whole other beast than Soul Reaper women for the teen. He had to guess that it was just their natural instincts to dominate in fights but he was also a pretty dominant guy himself. He breathed in lie as he looked towards the starry night sky before looking down to the two beauties sprawled on the ground. Both satisfied and peaceful. He made sure to cover them up as much as possible with their own clothing, or in Yama's case the shredded remains of her clothes, before he got dressed himself. The teen smirked at the two before looking out towards the city, contempt on his day so far. I guess I should head on to Kisuke's shop, let her know what's going on. He thought to himself as he was about to get ready to head out. While he knew leaving the two out here wasn't the right thing to do, he also knew that if this Asian woman wanted him to join her in destroying the Soul Society, then he would have to let someone know. Looking back at Koro and Yama one last time, he couldn't help but smile at them. He turned away and leapt high in the air. Today was a good day for the teen as he continued to leap through the skies of Karakura town. He couldn't help but have the same smile essentially plastered on his face as he made his way over to Kisuke's shop. Sure, he could just use Shunpo, but he wanted to take the time to enjoy the night sky for a bit. Nothing was gonna take the smile off of his face until he felt a garganta open up above him. What now? The teen stopped and looked up to see the small garganta open and something small came out. He narrowed his eyes as the garganta closed on itself and the figure was free-falling towards him. Ichigo could barely make out just what this hollow was, but he definitely noticed that it looked like a small child of sorts. What the hell? He said more to himself than anything as the small figure began to yell out in the air. Daddy? Wait a minute, Ichigo started as he tilted his head to make sure he heard correctly. Daddy? Oh no. He started as he realized just what this little girl from the sound of her voice said. Daddy? Ichigo freaked out a bit as his eyes went wide at the fact of what this little girl was implying. Sure, he's had multiple women already, but there was no way he could actually have a child with one of them, right? Daddy? Right? Daddy? Oh, screw it. Ichigo leapt up high in the air and met the little girl halfway. She immediately latched onto him in a tight hug while he held onto her gently. I finally found Daddy. She spoke as she continued to nuzzle the crook of his neck. Ichigo couldn't help but smile at her. As he got a good look at her, he noticed that she shared characteristics to Koro as well as himself. Seeing that, he remembered that Koro wanted to tell him something before they made love on the hill. Was she what Koro wanted to tell me about? Ichigo thought to himself as he managed to detach the girl from him and get a good look at her face. She had the same eyes as him, that chocolate brown color everyone recognized as his own, and her face resembled Koro's so much it was practically a no-brainer who the mother was. I guess I'm a father now. Ichigo smiled at her as the thought did always cross his mind of being a dad later on in life. It wouldn't be hard since he had so many women to choose from, but he did wish he was a bit older before taking on such a responsibility. The thought of being a father with Koro made him think of the other girls he's been with. Denpachi, Kukaku, Yoruichi, Soifan, Rukia, Renka, Ikuko, Yumichika, Ranjiku, Isane, Nemu, and Yama. Did this mean that all of them were pregnant too? Daddy? The little girl in his arms tilted her head when she noticed a faraway look in his eyes. Ichigo refocused and smiled back at her, causing her to smile. And what is your name, little miss? The girl continued to smile as she answered him. I'm Yuzuki. Yuzuki. Ichigo started, what a beautiful name for a beautiful kid. She smiled and hugged him once more. Ichigo returned it as he thought of just who to talk to in this situation, though she was at the moment laying nude on a hill right now. Smirking to himself, Ichigo pulled Yuzuki away to look her in the eyes before speaking. Let's go find your mother, Yuzuki. Yuzuki's smile was so large that it looked like it would split her face open. She nodded as she pointed off in the direction Koro was in. Mommy is that way. A black and red energy came out of her finger in a line of sorts and made a beeline for Koro, surprising Ichigo. He noticed that it was very similar to his own energy. Made sense to him since she's his daughter, so he shrugged it off and held her tightly. Hold on. She did so with the same smile as Ichigo used his own speed to reach and awaken Koro and a still unconscious Yama on the hill. The moment Koro saw Ichigo, she smiled at him, but then she noticed the child waving at her and blushed a bit at her own attire. Well, more like lack thereof. Quickly finding her coat, Koro covered herself up before walking over to the two. Sorry to leave you like that. Ichigo started as she made her way to them. You two were peed out, so I figured this was for the best. Koro smiled and at him as soon as she was close. It's alright. Mommy? Yuzuki started as she let go of Ichigo and leapt toward Koro. Koro caught her and was instantly in a hug from the girl. She returned it much to Ichigo's delight, yet he saw a look of confusion in her eyes. What's wrong? I thought you wanted to tell me about Yuzuki to start with. It's not just that. Koro loosened Yuzuki's grip so they both could get a good look at her. It's just when I left her in my room, she was only a baby. The baby? This caught Ichigo off guard. Yes. Koro looked back to Ichigo with a slight smirk. It seems that around her children age in a sense. Ichigo smiled back at her and leaned over to her again. I guess so. he turned to the smiling Yuzuki. Man, this is gonna be a weird conversation with my dad. The two chuckled for a bit before Yama suddenly woke up with a jolt as she sat up quickly. She had a completely dazed look in her eyes as she shook her head to refocus. Noticing the three next to her, Yama saw the kid in Koro's arms and held a look of both confusion and a slight anger. Damn it all, she started as she scratched the back of her head. Now I want a kid all of a sudden. This, in turn, had Yuzuki laughing, which caused Ichigo to laugh as well. Koro simply giggled under her breath at her comrade sulking. Things had been pretty hectic since the discovery of pregnant women throughout the Soul Society. A grand total of 11 women had been confirmed to be pregnant by, who else, Ichigo Kurosaki. Iruchi Shihoin, Kukaku Shiba, Captain Kenpachi Zaraki, Ikuko Madaram, Yumichike Asagawa, Rukia Kichiki, Captain Soifon, Lieutenant Renka Abarai, Lieutenant Ranjiku Matsumoto, Lieutenant Isane Katetsu, and Lieutenant Nemu Kuritsuchi had all been confirmed pregnant by Captain Unohana, and the response was near deafening. For Iruchi, since she was the former head of the Shihoin clan and no longer banished, the Shihoin clan wanted to immediately reinstate her and make her child the next heir. Now of course Iruchi protested this and was actually against the whole thing. The fact that she was going to have a baby was already too much for the usually fun and carefree woman, but even she knew that things would turn bad if she disagreed with them. It actually took her younger sister, Yashiro Shihoin, to convince her to at least hear the elders out. Kukaku was one of the only remaining and noticeable Shibas in the Soul Society, so the fact that she was having a child meant that the Central 46 wanted to bring back the Shiba clan as a whole. Of course, Kukaku already saw through the BS that those old women wanted. They didn't care enough about the remaining Shiba before until Ichigo, a very powerful male who has been accomplishing so much in such a short time, impregnated her and was giving her a powerful child. Unlike the Shihoin clan, the Shiba elders were long dead, and the only other Shiba members out there were Genji, Kukaku's sister, and a bunch of regular women scattered about. Since she was the most powerful and the cousin of the former clan head, she found a loophole that essentially made her the head of the Shibas with no elders in her way. This effectively gave Kukaku full control of all Shiba matters. Kenpachi was actually fairly happy to get knocked up by her strawberry. She knew that their kid would be one Haluva powerhouse when she comes out, and it was also nice to be able to give Yuichiro a little sister to play with. While Kenpachi was excited, she was then told a problem in her eyes by Unohana. No more fighting until she gives birth. This angered the savage woman as fighting was her fun time, and to be told not to do that for fear of injuring the baby was irritating to her. Oh well. She at least knew that none of her squad members would try anything stupid against her, for fear that she would retaliate. Both Ikuko and Yumichika were told the same thing. No fighting until birth was done. They hated it and wanted to protest, but it was Kenpachi that told them both to just deal with it for now. The Kichiki clan was both over the moon about this information of Rukia's pregnancy and disappointed at the fact that it wasn't by Akurin. There were preparations going on in the manor for when the child would be delivered, and Rukia was feeling very anxious about all of this. Almost a month ago, these same Kichiki clan members and elders condemned her actions and promoted her execution, saying that she has disgraced the Kichiki name and should die for it. Now, they are essentially bending over backwards to ensure that Rukia has a healthy delivery. Byakuran explained to her younger sister that the elders had always pressured her to conceive an heir to the clan, but she had always refused as it would impede her duties as a captain. Now that Rukia is pregnant, and by someone as powerful as Ichigo who is also a male, the elders knew that they could finally have their heir, and one that would be very powerful. The only thing that would make them all truly over the moon would be if Byakuran became pregnant by Ichigo as well. Soifon felt horrible about this whole thing. Not only had she been convinced by Iruchi to have an intense and passionate night with the only male soul in existence, but she had also gotten pregnant for it as well. It really shouldn't have surprised her that they did get pregnant, since none of them used protection of the sort. Now she had to ease up on her duties in order not to stress the baby. She was seething that her work had to effectively be put on halt, all because she showed a moment of weakness with that male. Her clan was happy for her though, as they wanted her to embrace the idea of being a mother. The fact that it was Ichigo that impregnated her was also a plus since he was so powerful already. It would show that the Fawn clan was actually to be taken seriously now. As for the 4 lieutenants, they all received a scolding from their respective captains, or in one's case, subtle praise. Renka was essentially told off by Byakuran on how she could get herself pregnant so recklessly and even drag Rukia into it without even considering her. Well, that last part came out by accident as Byakuran blushed up a storm after that. Renka was given time off duty to prepare for the delivery. A delivery she was nervous about, but excited as well. To say that Captain Shiroyuki was angered by her lieutenant's idiocy was an understatement. She yelled so loud at Ranjiku's recklessness that she nearly lost her voice in the process. While Ranjiku wasn't all too excited about being a mother so soon, she couldn't deny that it was a new experience she had never felt before. She had only wished her child friend Gina were here to congratulate her at least. Unfortunately, as her punishment from Shiroyuki, Ranjiku could not drink any alcohol until she gave birth. Of course, Ranjiku was very distraught over that. Anohana was usually a very patient and temperamental person, but to hear that her lieutenant did something so stupid as to listen to and follow Ranjiku Matsumoto to the world of the living for a night of unprotectedness was really straining her patience and temperament. She didn't yell or shout or even scream at Isane, she simply brought her a backroom in Squad 4 and put the fear of God to never do something like this again. Isane, for her part, swore she would never listen to Ranjiku's stupid ideas ever again. Unrelated note, Isane had helped deliver many children before, so to be on the other side of the process was scary to her. She was given leave and spent time with her little sister who was excited to be an aunt and happy for her older sister loosening up. Maybe being a mother wouldn't be so bad after all. The only one to not be scolded or shouted at was Nemu, as her captain was far too excited to experiment on this new and unknown soul. She had actually ordered her surrogate daughter to follow Lieutenant Matsumoto and Katetsu to the world of the living for the specific task of getting a sample of Ichigo Kurisaki's seed. To hear that Nemu was pregnant was too good to be true for the mad scientist. While she wouldn't kill the child like some in her department thought she would, Mayuri wanted to see just what would come about from this union of a male soul and a female soul. She had run tests on Nemu and had come to a conclusion that because of Ichigo's unique energy and powers, along with the fact that not a single person here knew just what the ramifications would be if he had impregnated someone, had found out that the growth of the child was much than a normal copulation. Instead of several months for the body to be formed using both energies of the parents, it seems that Ichigo's power was accelerating the growth of the child in the dot. By her estimation, all of the women impregnated by Ichigo should be giving birth in about 3.5 weeks. When that information was announced to everyone, there was a slight panic from some, as the fact that in only 3.5 weeks they would give birth was insane. Kenpachi laughed, as it only meant a shorter time till she could fight again. The head captain could do nothing but chuckle under her breath, much to the surprise of everyone in the meeting. "I suppose we should inform Ichigo Kurosaki of his upcoming parents," she announced to everyone present. "With all due respect, head captain," Joshiraku Yukitake started in a concerned tone. "I know that this is an unexpected turn of events, but what if Ichigo chooses not to be involved in his children's lives?" It was a horrible gut punch to some that no one had even considered yet. Ichigo was only 15 years old and still a human. He was far too young to start having children now, and the stress of it all could be too much for him to handle. This was something that caused the pregnant women, sans Nemu and Soifan, to feel terrible for having to put someone so young in this uncomfortable position. Nobody knew what his reaction would be or just how he would respond to this new development. Would he be angry? Would he be in denial? Would he reject the idea entirely? It was all up in the air for them, and they did not like it. The head captain started, getting everyone's attention as she stroked her chin and thought. "I think he will not do something like that." "What do you mean, head captain?" Kamamura asked her while raising a brow. "I have spoken to Ichigo Kurosaki before," the old woman replied, "and I can tell he is a man of honor. I don't believe he will reject the lives he has brought this world. It's just a feeling I have about him." Everyone who knew Ichigo started to think about it. He was a noble man who put others above himself and would do anything to protect the ones closest to him. He was kind, funny, determined, and above all else, a man of honor. The head captain was right about that. Ichigo could have easily avoided or distanced himself from any of them when they were finished with their night, but he didn't. He kept in touch with the ones he could and told them to relay messages to the ones he couldn't get in touch with. Only a caring man would do something like that. The head captain could see the ones that had that doubt in their minds thinking over her words about Ichigo and smirked. She banged her cane down to get everyone's attention before speaking. "Then it is decided then. Inform Ichigo Kurosaki of his impending father as soon as possible." "Yes, ma'am." Everyone started in unison. The older woman chuckled slightly under her breath once more. "Is there something funny I'm missing, old lady Yama?" Shizuka Kairaku asked while tipping her hat up. The head captain simply smirked at her former student. "Oh, I was just thinking that with so many of these young people copulating that maybe it was time I gave the boy a taste myself." The reaction from everyone in the room was priceless as they all went paler than Kuretsuchi's makeup. "What?" she said as she looked around the room. "I used to be a wild and rambunctious woman back in my younger days." But that, most of the occupants of the meeting room left rather quickly. The old woman could do nothing but laugh at the young. "Back with Ichigo." "Achoo." Ichigo sneezed with his free arm while he used his other arm to carry Yuzuki around. "Are you alright, daddy?" Yuzuki asked as Koro and Yama walked on either side of him, also looking concerned. "Yep." He answered her with a smile. I think someone's talking about me. Well, whoever it is had better not try anything while I'm around. Koro responded. Ichigo wrapped her around the waist and smiled at how she quickly nuzzled his shoulder. It's probably nothing to worry about for now. Just as he said those words, they all made it to his home. This would be a very odd conversation with everyone, but why were there so many more people? Ichigo had felt the various energies in his home before they made it to the front door, and to say he was a bit confused by their presence was an understatement. Ichigo handed Yuzuki to Koro and told them to take a few steps back. They complied, even though they had no clue why he would ask them to do this, and watched as Ichigo took a breath before opening the door. To their surprise and his irritation, Ichigo's father came rushing towards him and was about to dropkick his son in the face. Ichigo dodged it and quickly grabbed his father by the legs before tossing him outside to the other side of the road. Whoa. Yuzuki started with a laugh. Daddy is strong. Yes, he is. Koro answered her with a smile. Ichigo turned towards them and smirked. Let's head before he wakes up and annoys me some more. Koro wasted no time latching herself to Ichigo, and Yuzuki did the same as she hugged her father tightly. Yama was once again jealous of this as she wanted to latch onto him as well. They entered the house and Ichigo quickly closed and locked the door behind them before his father could wake back up and rush through. When they went in, Ichigo was greeted by his sister Yuzu, who could actually make out the others around her brother. She couldn't fully see them, but knew they were there and two of them were latched onto him. She could also feel that one of them had a strong connection to her brother, and it caused her to smile. Welcome home, big brother. Ichigo smiled down at her. Thanks, Yuz. He stopped himself as he began to realize something that was completely off. Something he had completely forgotten about, and now that he realized it might have put him in a tough position. The problem being that he was still in his Soul Reaper form. Yuzu, can you actually see me? Yuzu for her part smiled and nodded to him. I can see you clearly, but not your friends all too well. She shrugged her shoulders. Though, I'm sure Karen could see them easier than I could. Ichigo was stunned for a moment before Yuzuki leapt out of his grip and landed in front of Ichigo's sister. Yuzu could vaguely see the smaller figure landing in front of her and knelt down to meet her. The smile she gave to Yuzuki caused said girl to smile as well before she just blurted out. Are you daddy's sister? That caught Yuzu off guard as she didn't expect to hear something like that. She looked at the little girl who was mainly a blurry figure and could feel the utter joy coming from her. Smiling down at her, Yuzu patted the girl's head, much to her delight, and answered her. I am. My name is Yuzu Kurosaki. What's yours? Yuzuki. She answered as she enjoyed being petted by her. Yuzu looked up to her brother and saw him scratching the back of his head sheepishly and giving a nervous chuckle. All she could do was give him an almost stern look before feeling Yuzuki hug her. It was that moment where, to Yuzu, the little girl became clear, as well as the two near Ichigo. She could see Yuzuki clearly nuzzling up to her and couldn't help but smile at how cute she was. Picking the little girl up and twirling her around a few times, much to her delight, Yuzu quickly went to the main room to show Karen their little niece. Ichigo sighed as he knew this was gonna be a strange conversation. The three went to see quite the sight. In the living room were Yuzu, Karen, Kan, Kuroda and Ichigo's body, Orihime Chad, Uryu and Kisuke, as they were all adoring Yuzuki and her cheery personality. Ichigo and Koro watched on as they were happily enjoying seeing their daughter playing with Kan on the ground. Well, this is nice. Ichigo spoke up, getting everyone's attention. He waved at them as, aside from Yuzu and Karen, everyone was now on edge at seeing two rankers standing next to Ichigo. He felt the tension and decided to ease everyone down. It's cool, they're here with me, so it's fine. This did help as they relaxed a bit, but Kisuke was looking to Ichigo for an explanation. He gave her a smirk and led Koro and Yama to one of the couches, as the others sat down as well. Only Yuzu, Karen and Kan were still seated on the floor playing with Yuzuki. So, Ichigo, Kisuke started as she watched how one of the rankers stood behind the couch as she was too big and the other held onto Ichigo's arm. Now that she got a good look at them, Kisuke was sure they were espadas, and what was even stranger was the fact that the child looked eerily similar to both Ichigo and the one next to him. Mind explaining what you've been up to recently? Well, Ichigo started as he looked around the room to his friends and family. Yuzuki here is mine and Koro's daughter. Kuroda, Kan, Orihime Chad and Uryu were taken aback by this as they were unsure how this could even work. Ichigo was a human, while Koro was an Aranker. There shouldn't be any way that they could produce a child, right? If that was the case, then this whole situation just got more complicated. They all looked towards Kisuke as the woman could only nod at this information. And I take you three had a very pioneer time together. She emphasized that word and got the other girls to blush heavily at this, though it was weird seeing Kuroda and Ichigo's body doing that as well. Both Koro and Yama had different reactions to hearing that statement. Yama was a bit embarrassed and turned away with a blush marrying her face. True, it was no secret that most women are going to want a taste of this boy no, man, but that didn't mean she wanted her dirty laundry aired out in the open like that. Koro, on the other hand, nuzzled Ichigo's arm some more and gave the others in the room that was looking at him a cold stare that caused most to cower away. When she directed her gaze towards Kisuke, the former captain narrowed her eyes towards her, almost as if she were challenging the Espada for the only male Soul Reaper in existence. Ichigo, sensing the tension, once again had to defuse the situation. That's right. We just finished not too long ago, and don't you worry Kisuke. I'll get to you soon enough. Still owe you one for getting us to the Soul Society. Now it was Kisuke's turn to blush madly as she has yet to get a reward for helping Ichigo save Rukia. She was very much looking forward to it and was eager to get a taste of this stud of a man just like the others had. Oh wait. She shook her head as she remembered the exact reason why she was here. Speaking of the Soul Society Ichigo, there's a bit of a problem now that involves the various women you've been with. Gonna go out on a limb and guess that they're pregnant, right? Ichigo stopped her as he saw her widen her eyes in surprise for a bit as the other girls in the room could only look away in embarrassment. He looked around at the girls and could only sigh as he leaned back on the couch. Man, I hate being right sometimes. Well, you have been sleeping with them without any protection Kurosaki. Muryu started as she tried and failed to sound logical, only to lose so much oomph when she's blushing so heavily. She does have a point, Ichigo. Chad spoke up, also blushing and not daring to look her friend in the eye. I get it. Ichigo said as he looked at Kisuke. Are they okay? Kisuke could hear the genuine concern in his voice as he looked at her with the eyes of a man willing and able to accept any repercussions and any responsibility he had to. She was taken aback by his conviction and sense of responsibility to a simple question, and she had a feeling that the others thought the same thing about him, just growing what they already knew and felt for him even further. She smiled as she brought out her fan in her usual way. They're all doing well. She could see Ichigo relax at hearing that and continued. From what Captain Kuritsuchi could find out in her research when examining her daughter Nemu, it seems that your energy dominates the entire process of childbirth. Dominates? He asked her. Usually during copulation, both women agree who carries the child and the other places their energy within them to get a perfect mixture of the two. Kisuke explained. During a standard 9-month process, that energy mixture begins to form and take shape within thee and forms a child that is birthed the same way as any other birth, but your energy is drastically different Ichigo. How so? Yours is too strong. Meaning? Well, even if the one impregnating the other is stronger than her, the energy is able to synchronize together and eventually find a perfect balance so as not to cause harm to the other. Kisuke continued. But your energy is too strong and overwhelming that it is the soul energy that will be reproduced. That's not how Yuzuki was born. Koro spoke up as she saw her daughter now in the kitchen with Yuzu, Karen and Kuroda. When I gave birth to her, she had both mine and Ichigo's energy. Kisuke raised a brow as she would need to research this further by getting a sample from Yuzuki. Closing her fan and placing her hand on her chin, Kisuke thought about it for a moment before continuing. Then that must mean it's different for rankers than soul reapers. When did you two first copulate and how long was it when you gave birth to her? This time it was Koro's turn to blush as she recalled that night in vivid detail, making the other girls practically drool at the notion of Ichigo taking them like that. Afterwards, it was about a week later that I gave birth to Yuzuki. Kisuke shook her head again to refocus. Strange. From what Kuritsuchi gathered, all those women will give birth in about 3.5 weeks. 3.5 weeks? Ichigo asked her. I thought that Soul Reapers gave birth in 9 months. Like I said Ichigo, your power is too strong and overwhelming. Kisuke answered. It sped up the process, and most of them are already showing signs of pregnancy last I saw. Then, Ichigo stood up as Koro let his arm go. Could you take me to Kisuke? I want to see them all myself. Kisuke once again was surprised by Ichigo's conviction for a 15-year-old. He was much older than he should have been in terms of maturity. She smirked at him and stood up. Then, I only have one last surprise to let you know Ichigo. Ichigo raised a brow to this and wondered just what she was talking about. That was when he heard the front door open and forgot his father always carried a spare key with him. He turned towards the door expecting to see his goofball dad round the corner, only to stop halfway when he saw a woman he had never seen before. She looked almost like a gender-swapped version of Ichigo sans the orange hair being midnight black. She was wearing a Soul Reaper's uniform and had a tattered captain's haori draped over her shoulder. She was hanging off of her side loosely by some strings. She looked to Ichigo with a big toothed grin that Ichigo knew all too well, and he saw that she was holding a male body under her arm. That body was Isen's. Ichigo's mind was reeling for a sec before he put 2 and 2 together. Dad. The woman chuckled as the ones unaware of the truth, mainly everyone but Kisuke and Kuroda, were shocked and surprised by what they just heard. The woman walked over towards her son and laid the female body down on a chair. She stood in front of Ichigo, eye to eye, and could only grin at him. "Damn, it's good to see my own son with my real eyes for a change," she said before forcefully hugging him, much to Ichigo's surprise. Ichigo may have been confused at first, he could feel how much she cared and could do nothing but wrap his arms around her as well in a gentle embrace. After a couple minutes, Isin let her son go and could see Yuzu and Karen staring at her with both wonder and curiosity in their eyes. She could only smile towards the twins as they rushed over towards her. She knelt down and embraced them both as she was happy to no longer have to hide her true self from her children anymore. It was a nice moment for the family as so many things started to make sense towards Ichigo. Like how he was always able to see spirits and the like since he was a kid, or why his father would always try to attack him to keep his skills sharp just in case things like this happened with the Soul Reapers and Hollows. Ahem, Kisuke interrupted the nice moment between Isin and her daughters. "I think it's time you explained everything to them, Isin." Isin nodded and looked towards her son with a slight smile. She motioned for him to sit down as she did the same on a recliner next to the couches. Ichigo was quick to sit down as Koro scooted next to him and Yuzu and Karen also sat near him. "Well, I guess I might as well get the fairly obvious out of the way." She motioned to herself. "As you can see, I am a woman. Born and raised in the Soul Society of the Shiba clan." "Shiba?" Ichigo questioned with a raised brow. "You mean like Kukaku and her sister Genji?" "Yep." Isin smirked at her son and even wiggled her eyebrows a bit. "They're distant cousins of mine, which makes them distant cousins of yours." Hearing this, Ichigo paled a bit as he remembered his night with both Kukaku and Yuruchi. Isin couldn't help but laugh at her son's face as he just put two and two together on what this new information meant to him. Deciding to save that for later, Isin continued. "I was the head of the Shiba clan and former captain of Squad 10 about over 100 years ago, but then I met your mother Misaki." She turned to the large poster of her wife and let a warm smile across her face. "We didn't get along at first with her being Quincy and I a Soul Reaper, but soon enough, we were inseparable." Both Ichigo and Yuryu gasped at that. "Mom was Quincy?" he asked her with slightly widened eyes. "Yep. A pureblood Quincy too," Isin answered. "We had a run-in with a very powerful hollow. She took a hit to save my life and kill that hollow, but it cost Misaki her powers and even mine when I used my energy to stabilize hers. Had to get Kisuke's help for that one." "You're still very much welcome," Kisuke said in a sing-song-like tone with her fans. "Anyway," Isin continued on, "once I realized I had lost all my spirit energy, I decided to live in the world of the living with Misaki. Like I said, we were inseparable and soon fell in love with each other." There was a genuine look of longing in Isin's eyes as she reminisced about the old days. "Then, pretty soon we decided to start a family. As you know, Ichigo, there is a way for us to reproduce in the Soul Society using our own energies, but since both myself and Masuki lost ours, we had to get creative." "So, what did you both do?" Ichigo's curiosity piqued on this. "We went back to Kisuke and explained what we wanted to do. She was happy to help by placing us in a specialty that would, at least for when we were intimate, restore a portion of our energy in order to have children. That is how you were born, Ichigo." While most people would never want to hear how intimate their parents were in creating them, Ichigo was actually very intrigued by just how he was born. It somewhat explained a few things, but there was one thing he wanted an answer to. "I thought whenever a child was born, they always came out female." Ichigo started, gaining everyone's attention as he looked to his father with a stern look that held so much hunger for an answer. "So why was I born male?" There was a bit of tension in the room as Isin and Ichigo stared at each other for what felt like hours. Neither wanting to back down from the other as time seems to tick away. Eventually, Isin let out a sigh that caught his attention. "We honestly don't know," she answered in a low tone that caught Ichigo off guard. "Maybe it was because Misaki was still human and I was a Soul Reaper, maybe it was because of our own energies mixing in an unnatural way with the Gigais, or maybe it was just a twist of fate. All I know is that you were born and that was all that mattered to us at the time." Everyone expected Ichigo to blow up in a fit of anger or outrage at hearing that his own existence was some unknown anomaly, but instead he just sighed and leaned back on the couch, head resting on his back. He closed his eyes and just chuckled to himself for a moment, confusing everyone there, especially Isin. "Ichigo?" she asked her son only for him to open his eyes and raise his head once more. "I guess it's just gonna be a mystery for now." He stood up and stretched a bit, popping several bones in the process, before looking back to Isin. "Whether it was some sort of accident or like you said a twist of fate, I'm happy that I even exist anyway to begin with. I may not know much about how everything works, but I'm hoping you can teach me, Dad." Isin could only smile as she stood up to meet her son's gaze. "Then I might as well show you a few moves before you head back to the Soul Society." She saw Ichigo's raised brow and chuckled to herself. "I say we spar for a bit." "Let's do it," Ichigo said without a moment's hesitation. Everyone else in the room, aside from Yuzuki who was still in the kitchen with Kan and Kuroda, sighed at how gung-ho these two were to fight each other. One thing was for sure though, it would be an interesting fight. Isuke's underground training area, 10 minutes later. Ichigo and Issen stood in the center of the training area as everyone else stood far away to watch. Yuzuki was on her mother's shoulders cheering her dad on while Koro did the same. Yuzu and Karen were cheering on both as they just wanted to be amazed by their brother and father. Yama sat down on a rock with her arms crossed as she was very interested in how strong Ichigo was in a fight. Isuke and the rest of the girls watched on and would step in if things got out of hand. Issen drew her blade first. Ready, Ichigo. Ichigo drew his cleaver and readied himself. Bring it on. Issen wasted no time as she rushed towards Ichigo at impressive speeds that even surprised her son. She brought her blade up and brought it crashing down. Ichigo blocked it, but the force caused a crater to form at his feet. Both gave the other a wide grin as they both knew this would be fun for sure. Ichigo forced her off and leapt at her. He brought his own blade down, and the two began to clash with one another. Each clang of their blades sent a shockwave of power throughout the training grounds as it seemed that both knew they were evenly matched. They would continue to clash for several seconds, moving in with each ping moment before appearing away from each other back on the ground. Isuke analyzed their fight carefully. While she knew of how strong Ichigo was, this was the first time she saw him fight herself. From what she observed, Issen had the edge in technique and experience, while Ichigo had power and speed for spades. That, and he was quick to adapt to her fighting style. It was intriguing to the former captain. Ryu Chad, Orihime, Kan and Kuroda were in awe of the fight. They had seen Ichigo fight before, but this was different. He seemed to be enjoying himself, same with Issen. It was a shocker to know that Issen used to be a former captain, but to actually see her back up that claim against Ichigo was something else entirely. Yama was impressed by Ichigo's display. It seems that he really is as strong as he looked and as strong as he was too. The thought of being nearly manhandled by him sent a shiver down her spine. Yuzu and Karen, along with Yuzuki, were amazed by what they were seeing. The fight was too much for them to keep up with, but from what they can see was that Ichigo was very strong just as Issen was as well. Yuzuki kept on cheering for her dad, while also enjoying seeing her father fight for the first time. Koro was not surprised by the display she saw as she knew just how strong Ichigo was. She was slightly surprised by how strong his father was, but then again if Ichigo came from her, then it made sense. Wow Ichigo. Issen started as she stood at the ready with hands on her. I gotta say, you're just as strong as I was in my prime, maybe even stronger, but let's see if you can match this. She raised her blade high in the air and channeled her energy. Ichigo grinned widely and raised his cleaver with one hand, gathering his own energy in the process. You better bring it then. Everyone could feel the intensity of their spirit energy as they prepared to launch their respective attacks. The two stared each other down as they finished gathering their respective energies, and right before they launched them, they both shouted out loud two words. Itsuga Tensho. From Issen, a wave of blue energy fired from her blade. From Ichigo, a wave of black with red highlights left his. The two waves of energy clashed and caused a large explosion that many had to shield themselves from. Both Kisuke and Orihime used their own shields for the ones who wouldn't be able to withstand the force of the explosion. Mainly Chad, Ryu, Kuroda, Yuzu and Karen. Koro held onto Yuzuki while the girl was still cheering on her father. Yama just braced herself as best as she could. Once the dust settled, there was now a large hole in the earth of the training grounds. Both Ichigo and Issen were only sweating lightly and still grinning from ear to ear once everything had settled down. Issen couldn't help but laugh at what they just did, and it caused Ichigo to join in a laughing fit. The two sheathed their respective weapons and walked over to each other. Yuzuki got out of her mother's grip and raced over to her dad with a twinkle in her eyes. Daddy. That was so cool. She yelled out as she jumped up to Ichigo's waiting arms. Ichigo hugged her as Issen smiled at her granddaughter's childish nature. This would definitely be good times for her and her family as a whole. One thing Issen was very much looking forward to was seeing all of her many grandchildren. She giggled to herself as she thought about all the grandchildren she could spoil. She stopped her daydreaming as she saw the others rushing over. Koro was already in Ichigo as she was happy nothing too bad happened. Yuzu and Karen were asking him so many different questions about just how powerful he was, stars in their eyes as they did so. Ryu and Orihime were both interested in that as well. Chad and Yama just stood back to watch, both smirking. Kan and Kuroda were both at the edge of the crater, along with Kisuke, as they were baffled by just how it was. Kisuke was crying crocodile tears over her training ground, now having basically a small lake without water in it. Issen shook her head at her old friend's misery and turned back to her son, who was smiling at all the girls around him. You would be proud of him, Masaki. Aizen's room at the moment. Sarako watched the entirety of the fight and didn't know how to feel at the moment. On one hand, she was very impressed by the boy's power and how it matched, and even in some cases Isen's. On the other hand, Ichigo was still an anomaly to her, and one that was throwing too much of a wrench in her plans. Not to mention that two of her espada were willingly with him now, and the fact that one of them had a child right under her nose. It was frustrating to the rogue to think how one person could make such a difference in such a short time. I need to think of a way to neutralize this boy. Will I find out why Hijoku was not Rukia Kichiki? She thought for a moment before an idea came to her. If Koro became pregnant in such a short time and gave birth in that same window, then that means Yama was now in the same boat. That also meant that all those other women he's had relations with are also pregnant. If I can capture one of them, then I can entice the boy and end him before he can. Before she could finish her sentence, Gina snuck up behind her and started to grope her, catching the woman by surprise. "Gina?" Sarako started as she turned to see the woman carrying a large pink dildo in her dot. With a sigh of contempt, Sarako put her thoughts on hold for now to indulge in cardinal desire for now. Though she knew to herself that while she would enjoy herself, she would still be thinking about Ichigo Kurosaki. It didn't take long for Ichigo and a few of the girls to get to the Sirite after the little spar earlier. Right now, it was just Ichigo, Kisuke, Ryuchad, Orihime and Kon going through the Dangai as Isen didn't want to expose herself right now. Yuzu and Karen didn't have too much experience or spirit energy to enter properly, so they asked their father to teach them. Garoda stayed behind with Yuzuki and Koro, as the two would spark too much aggression if they entered the Soul Society. Yama decided to lay down on the rocky grounds of the training area, even though she wasn't dumb enough to head the Soul Society. Ichigo was actually pretty excited to see his girls after so long. While the thought of being a father to so many children hadn't really dawned on him yet, he was still over the moon at the thought. One thing was for sure though, it was going to be one hell of a greeting he would receive. The group approached the exit with no trouble and found themselves falling. "What the hell?" Ichigo said to himself as the group fell from the portal. "Oops." Kisuke said in a comical way, gaining everyone's attention. "What do you mean oops?" Uryu asked her as she tried to regain her bearings. "I still have a few calculations to adjust." She brought out her fan and chuckled. "But at least we'll land the Sirite, so that's a plus." While the girls scowled at her, Ichigo could do nothing but slightly chuckle at this. Dottie started, gaining her attention. "Could you use your shield so we don't have to keep falling?" She nodded and held her hands out. Sant and Kessen, her hairpins light up and fire out 3 sprites. I rejected. A rather large shield appeared below them, causing them to land safely and slowly float down. The group let out a sigh while Kon berated Urahara for not preparing anything to set them down gently. The others laughed as Kon just kept shaking the former Soul Reaper captain by her coat. Ichigo shook his head at this until he felt an all too familiar spirit energies approaching where they would eventually land. He looked down to see a trail of purple and yellow moving down the various twists and turns of the Sirite and couldn't help but chuckle at the two down below. Sighing, he turned to his friends who heard him. "I'll see you girls at the bottom." He then stands up and steps off the shield, letting gravity take him down. The girls watched as he descended to the ground below and even saw the streaks of purple and yellow getting closer to his position. Ichigo saw the two and smiled as he decided to use his speed to appear on the ground. Once he did, he waited for all of 3 seconds before seeing both Yuruchi and Kenpachi going over and through a wall respectively and stopping to see him. "Hey girls." Ichigo started as he held his arms out. "Miss me?" He got his answer as the two rushed and tackled him to the ground in a tight embrace. Yuruchi wrapped her arms around his neck and her legs around his waist as Kenpachi held onto him tightly as well. Ichigo could feel that the two were very far in their pregnancies and made sure to hold them carefully so as not to hurt the babies. He was very contemptuous of laying there with the two for as long as they wanted, but even as he held onto the two, he could feel even more familiar presences approaching. Not as these two, but still relatively quick. "I'm guessing that this is a yes." He spoke up only for the two to look at him with a playful scowl from Yuruchi and a damn near feral grin from Kenpachi. "You sure took your sweet time getting back here." Yuruchi didn't seem all too amused at not seeing the strawberry for so long. At least 2 weeks is too long in her opinion. "Yeah, I had to take care of some things." Ichigo answered her before giving a chase to her. "Oh really?" Kenpachi interrupted as she pulled Ichigo away from Yuruchi to plant a hard and pionate to him. "I really hope we're not interrupting." A new voice stopped the two and caused the three to look ahead to Captain Unohana, standing there with her arms crossed and a slight scowl to her face. "I think there is much to discuss, Ichigo Kuro." Just before she could finish that statement, the other girls all came out and rushed the only man in the Soul Society, completely ignoring the captain. The only one who didn't do so and stood next to the now frustrated woman was Captain Soifon, as she was trying to keep up with Yuruchi at first. Right now, Ichigo is surrounded by all 10 women he slept with and he couldn't be happier. Though he did notice that they were all fairly far in their pregnancies, it didn't deter him from planting on each and every single one of them, just the way they each like it. Quick for Nemu, Isane and Kukaku. Pinnately for Rukia, Yumichika, Renka and Yuruchi. Rough for Kenpachi, Ikuko and Ranjiku. The way he did this almost had Soifan nearly jumping in on the action, but she tried to restrain herself and not fall for the man again. That went out the window when he looked at her and beckoned her to join in. She couldn't resist and ran over to join in, much to Yuruchi's delight at seeing her former student loosen up once more. While this was going on, Anohana had to look away as she was starting to blush at the sight of one man satisfying 11 women without any trouble. She wanted to join in herself, especially after hearing the rather proactive way Ranjiku explained her steamy time with the man. She shook those thoughts from her mind as she tried to get to the real situation at hand here. She looked to see everyone on their feet now and talked amongst themselves. She sighed and walked over to the group just as Kisu Kurihara and those other human girls and Mod Soul came down. I believe it's time we discuss the severity of this situation we are currently in, Ichigo Kurosaki. She started, gaining everyone's attention. Alright then. Ichigo nodded with a smirk. It was time to hear just how everything would go for his girls. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe and comment down below and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow the StringDman for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.